Naumi chit pratibham devim param bhairava yoginim matarmana prameyam shula bhuja kritaspadam. Om, salutations to that goddess, consciousness, who is ever playful and beautiful, who is manifesting herself in each and every moment as the triad of knower, knowing, and known, who is inseparable from Bhairava, who is always in union with Bhairava. I bow to that goddess established upon the lotus, mounted atop the trident of my heart. Om Naumi Devim Sharirastham Nrityato Bhairava Kritehe Pravrin Megha Ghanna Vyoma Vidyulekha Vilasinim. I praise that goddess Kundalini, who is the energy abiding in the body of the dancing Shiva, which is this manifest universe. She is playful and beautiful and terrifying, like a streak of lightning flashing across the cloudy sky in the monsoon season. May this be an offering at her lotus feet. Yathagner dahika shakti Rama Krishna sthitha hiya sarva vidya swarupam tam saradam pranamamyam om shanti shanti shanti. May this be an offering to Sarada Devi, the embodiment of all the vidyas, Kali, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chunamastaka, Dhumavati, Bagala, Matangi, Kamala, Durga, and others. Om peace, peace, peace. Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Gurubhyo Namaha. So, somewhat provocative title tonight, and I intend to treat this subject on three levels. There are three parts to this, maybe four. The first part is, I think, the subtlest and the most theologically important. It's going to be a sort of walkthrough of the aesthetic, poetic, and very novel soteriology of Śaiva non-duality. So Śaiva monism is unique in that it emphasizes poetics and aesthetics more than maybe any other school of Indian philosophy. And notice the metaphysical view of the universe and of the self and of God is the foundation for its soteriological claim. So what it looks like to be free, again, remember the word soteriology means what a tradition says about liberation or about emancipation or final release or even meaning and fulfillment. So in one sense, soteriology is included within a broader context of meaning, value, aesthetics, and the theory of fulfillment. So what is it to be successful in spiritual life? Like, what does it look like to be liberated? Are you still embodied? Can you be considered to be free while still experiencing the limitations of a body confined to time, space, and causality? Is there such a thing as jivan mukti, liberation while embodied? In fact, often that term is a dyad, jiva, meaning to be embodied, and mukti, to be free, and that dyad is often seen as a kind of inherently paradoxical thing. So the word api, while, is sometimes also added to kind of reconcile the dyad. So jivan api mukti, liberation even though embodied. Is that a thing? Is that possible? Or is liberation only available once we kick the mortal coil and go beyond time, space, and causality? This is called videha mukti. And some schools of spirituality, even Abrahamic schools, like Christian theologians will say it's a videha mukti sort of model where you have to like do something in this world, you won't be free until you kick the bucket, and then as a result of what you did in this world, then you go to some eternal heaven or something, and that's when you're free. This is still called videha mukti. And even more subtly, some yogic models, like say the nirvikalpa samadhi model of Patanjali and yoga, even that is a videha mukti model, because there you could argue that it's only in nirvikalpa samadhi, a special type of transcendental meditation state. It's only then that you're truly free, because it's only then that you're beyond the body and beyond the mind. So even if the body might remain as like a husk or something that people will put garlands on, that's not you. You've gone beyond the body, and in fact, you might actually have no use for the body. And in 21 days, as Sri Ramakrishna says, it'll fall away like a dry leaf. That's still a videha mukti model. So to be liberated while embodied is a kind of soteriology that we find maybe in the monistic schools like Kevala Advaita and in this Śaiva or Tantric monism. But notice, the version of it in Kevala Advaita is different from that which is presented in the Śaiva monistic world. So soteriology is a discussion of what it means to be happy and fulfilled. And like I said, the goal of almost all spiritual philosophies is to present this atyantika dukkha nivritti model, the permanent and categorical end of all suffering. Importantly though, some schools, not all schools, will also say that this is a positive something. Like the absence of an absence is itself something, and therefore it's called bliss, ānanda. And there's a whole section in the Taittirīyopanishad about ānanda, about different kinds of bliss that you can enjoy in the world. And there's a categorization, like distinguishing between worldly joy or sensual joy, what we might otherwise call bhoga, distinguishing between that and bhajan ānanda, a kind of sublime and maybe even transcendental joy that you would get from something like puja or homa or even samadhi. Like there's a joy that is not of this world, that this world can only merely whet our appetite for. So some other kind of joy. It's called bhajana. Are they categorically distinct? Like, is the joy of spirituality categorically something other than the joy of, I don't know, chocolate cake or an orgasm or the breeze blowing across your face on a spring day? Like, are these categorically distinct? And more importantly, there's this third category that we get from the Taittirīyopanishad called Brahma-ānanda, the bliss of Brahman, the bliss of the absolute. And it's interesting to note that this too is distinguished from spiritual joy. So it's like there's this transcendental joy called bhajanānanda that you get from spiritual life. And then there's this worldly joy, bhoga, which you get from participating and engaging with the world of objects, otherwise known as Vishāyananda, the bliss of the senses, sensual joy, which, by the way, interestingly also includes, to some extent, intellectual joy, like hopefully the joy we're going to have tonight as we inquire into some very subtle intellectual themes, but also the joy of like art and poetry, this kind of aesthetic joy that we get from looking at beautiful paintings, listening to beautiful music, even hearing a beautiful poem. Like, all of these are also, to some extent, sensual because they involve the senses, but to some extent they're also transcendental because they seem to imply, the word here in Sanskrit is dhvani, which we'll talk a lot about today, technical term in the tradition. These joys seem to imply something sublime, something transcendent. And so there's a kind of interstitial space between bhoga and spiritual joy, between worldly sensual joy and something that you get in a transcendental place. Like, that in between seems to be our art-making projects as human beings. And that is aesthetics, aesthetic theory, or the philosophy of beauty and the philosophy of art, the philosophy of poetics. This is very important in Shaivism. Like I was saying last week, it's one of the key distinguishing features of our tradition. Like, it's one of the things that we emphatically emphasize. Emphatically emphasize. That was pretty. That was emphasis, if ever there was emphasis. We emphatically emphasize this very emphasized point called beauty, aesthetics. So this is, I will argue, a kind of synthesis. There's a trika here between worldly joy and transcendental joy, and that Brahmananda, which is somehow this third other thing. And I'm going to say the reconciliation between these three can be found in Shaiva monism through its aesthetic theories. So we have this discussion in the Upanishads, in the Taittirīyopanishads, about bliss. I mean to invoke that. And importantly, we also have a dichotomy presented by the Katha Upanishad, which is of course very important for Vedanta. The dichotomy is between Shreyas and Preyas, the path of like worldly enjoyment and the path of like spiritual enjoyment. There's a dichotomy. So if you choose one path, arguably you're a fool. The Upanishad says so. You're like absolutely an idiot for choosing that kind of bliss because it seems to come at the cost, at least that's the impression one might get from studying the Katha Upanishad, of this other joy, which would be wise to pursue. And that joy is bitter in the beginning and beautiful in the end, whereas this other joy is beautiful in the beginning and bitter at the end. I wholeheartedly reject that dichotomy, and I'm going to argue against it. I'm going to offer an explanation and a different reading of the Katha Upanishad. And this will all be under the heading Sukhopaya, the path of pleasure, the path of bliss, the path of aesthetics, if you will, which is a term that is technical and unique to the Shaiva monistic tradition. And it's this Sukhopaya that obviously informs our Vamachara or Kaulachara approach, and it informs things like the Vijñāna-Bhairava Tantra, especially between verses like 65 through to 74 or something. These are all practices around bliss, but the kinds of bliss that these practices invoke are pretty worldly in that they're about just orgasms and chocolate cake, about seeing a long-lost relative, about enjoying a joke, about just engaging with the beauty that's already inherent in the world, and in food, and in music, and in art. So notice, Vijñāna-Bhairava verses 65 like to 74 or something, 75, is like essentially this Vamachara, Kaulachara, aesthetic, Sukhopaya sort of thing. So the two parts that I want to start off with are as follows. The first part will be about the Śaiva metaphysic and the Soteriology that we get based on this aesthetic theory. The second part is going to be about the practical part and aspect of our tradition, where we actually put these ideas into practice, and that changes the way we do puja, it changes the way we show up in the world, it changes how we regard our own desires and our own interests, especially those artistic inclinations that we all have. This is how we address those. The third part of the lecture, though, I'm excited about. The third part is a sort of etymology about the word bhakti. I want to inquire into the word bhakti, and you'll see the word bhakti, its root is bhaj. And bhaj can be used in many different contexts, but essentially it means something like to participate in. So bhakti is the participating in God. Devotion is otherwise known as being with God, upasana, sitting near that which we call God, or Kali, or whatever you want to call it, Bhairava, or Jesus even, like whatever name you give God, being near that, or participating in that, or partaking of that is called bhakti. Devotion. So when we read the word bhakti as participation, using the root bhaj in its most literal sense, I think there's some nuance that we can get here. There's something about congregational spirituality that we can talk about. And that's what partying essentially is. To party is not just to engage with bliss and pleasure and enjoy yourself. It's often to do that, but with others. There's something about getting together and going to a rave. Or throwing a party means inviting people over and then serving intoxicants usually. So in this whole conversation around partying, it's not just about sukhopaya, pleasure, aesthetics, beauty, and whether or not that is a viable and spiritually nourishing path, or whether or not that's a distraction that seems to be mutually exclusive from spiritual joy, which, you have to sacrifice everything for. It's also this discussion about like what other people have to do with your spirituality. Is spirituality the flight of the alone to the alone? If so, can we share the path with others? And what does that look like? So then we can not only take up the Vamachara practices, meaning like, Vijñāna-Bhairava verses 65 onwards, and obviously all the Panchamakara stuff and the Shakti Puja and whatnot. We don't only get some insight on that, but we also get some insight on the Kaula Marga as a kula, as a community, as people coming together. I'm going to argue that it's always best together because you can never party alone. In fact, the truth of the matter is that you're never alone, you're all one. And the way that we express that all oneness is by engaging in congregational spirituality, which is manifestly opposed to the isolationist and somewhat like loneliness fetishizing that you get in some other spiritual traditions that preach asceticism or hermeticism or hesychism. So there's a sort of urban householder approach that we get in Vamachara, Kaulachara that is almost diametrically opposed to this fucking off to the Himalayas and sitting by yourself in the cave and thinking that you're better than everyone because, you're like alone or something. Whereas they're all there in the world participating in these like sensual indulgences which are ultimately unreasonable and senseless. And here you are, engaging in some refined spiritual quest for the absolute by yourself off to the corner, and this makes you superior. And so it's like that meme, where the guy is standing in the corner of the room and he has a drink and he's like grumpy and he's looking at all the people dancing and he's like, they don't know, and then insert something like a meme. And then there's like a response. There's a response meme. And that meme is where like the thought bubbles of all the people who are dancing, it says something like, oh, we know. We just choose to engage in, like something like that. So I want to take up this discussion as to what extent is it valuable spiritually to be by yourself. And arguably, of course, it's valuable to take time away from everyone and sit by yourself and practice in solitude. Sri Ramakrishna used to recommend this all the time. He would tell people to go on retreats, if not just for like a day or two, at least for an hour or two, just stepping aside and leaving everything behind and sitting by yourself and engaging in some kind of spiritual practice. If you don't take the milk away from the household and put it in some corner, it will never settle into curd. And if you don't do spiritual practices, which are often done in solitude in most cases, that milk will never be churned into butter. And it's only that butter, arguably, that when reintroduced to the world will be safe. And so Sri Ramakrishna gives this metaphor, like when you are butter, then you can be put into the waters of the world and you'll just float. Nothing will affect you. Whereas if you are milk and you've not yet been set aside and in solitude and spiritual practice churned into butter, then when you're put into water, the milk will mix with the water and then you'll be entangled with all the suffering in the world that we call samsara or maya. So when we put all this together, you'll see there's room in this for solitude. But Sri Ramakrishna would also juxtapose that instruction with another instruction that he often gave to people, which is sadhu sangha, the company of the holy. So now Sri Ramakrishna is at once telling you to go and sit by yourself and churn the butter. And he's also saying you should get together with other butter churners and have a festival of butter. And these two together, I want to reconcile in presenting the Śaiva monism or Śaiva aesthetic. So 3 parts. Firstly, a broad overarching metaphysical view of the Śaiva tradition and the Soteriology that is unique to this monism. And by the way, when I do this, I'm also going to be engaging with materialism, reductionist materialism, and the quote-unquote, you can't quite call it a soteriology, but maybe a sort of axiology or teleology that is implied by that reductionist materialist model. I'm going to negate that. Then I'm going to look at Vedantic models, which are sometimes called subjective idealist models that reject the world as an illusion. So the reductionist materialist view, which is very common in the West, of course, it's the sort of inadvertent default philosophy that most people are born into as a result of engaging in a science-oriented, rationalist Western world. That's going to ultimately lead to hedonism. That, the value system that you get from that, arguably, is hedonism. Then, importantly, the antithesis to this is idealism, which you get in Vedanta and many other schools of spiritual philosophy, where the world is seen as illusory. So here you get asceticism, where you see hedonism as a problem, you see the world as a problem. In fact, you see the world as an error, as an illusion, which is to be dispelled. And then you opt for a more ascetic life, a lonely life, a monastic life, a life that says no to chocolate cake and orgasms, because you're saying yes to something which you consider to be real, having rejected the world of senses as unreal. So that's ascetic in orientation. So the soteriology, or I shouldn't say soteriology, let's say methodology. The methodology of the subjective idealist camp is asceticism, and the methodology of the materialist reductionist camp is hedonism, more or less. And I'm going to say that there's a third thing in classic Trika fashion. In order to find the synthesis between the thesis and the antithesis, I'm going to present this Śaiva monistic metaphysic and say the third thing is something that combines both that asceticism that you get in the subjective idealist camp with the hedonism that you get in the materialist camp to articulate a deeper, richer sort of bhoga, which can be couched in aesthetic terms. So that's the first part of the talk. The second part of the talk, like I said earlier, is of course entering into the practices of the tradition, which are informed by these theories. And the third part of the talk is just etymologically inquiring into the word bhakti and the role of congregational spirituality in all of this, and how that congregation will actually support those practices in part 2, and how those practices in part 2 are informed in part 1. All of these hopefully will be a sort of triad of ideas. So in classical Trika fashion, here's my analysis on partying as a spiritual practice, with reference to 3 distinct features: theory, practice, and of course the role of congregation in supporting that theory and practice. Essentially the kaula. What is the kula? And why do we have to be a kula? Why is a kula important? These are the conversations I want to have. Fourth part, the bonus part, is of course the Q&A. I think today Q&A is particularly important, because these are very subtle ideas. And we'll start with the subtlest of all the ideas and then slowly filter our way down to the more practical, more grounded, like, what can I do now sort of thing. But the subtle ideas, you just hear them and they make an impression upon you, and that's enough. But if you want to read closely the various texts that I'll be citing throughout this lecture, you'll naturally want to ask certain questions. Like, you'll want to clarify that position, and that's the sadhana. Yoganga, what is it? Tarko Yoganga Uttama. The supreme sadhana is tarka, analysis, philosophical inquiry. So I want us to see this fourth section, this Q&A, as a sadhana, where we ask questions and we clarify our positions and we debate and we discuss and we push back upon certain ideas, and that's all involving the buddhi, the intellect. And that process is a sadhana. It's one of the limbs of yoga. The 8-fold yoga that you get from Patanjali, that's not the only model of yoga that we have. In the tantric world, we more or less import Patanjali's, Ashtanga yoga, the system of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. You know about this. But we import some of those things, but not all of those things. For example, we accept asana, we accept pranayama, but in addition to dhyana, to pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, we also add tarka, reasoning. That's one of the limbs of yoga in this tradition. And reasoning is hearing the idea, thinking and contemplating about the idea, and then asking questions and discussing and debating. So that's very important, actually. And it is a substitute for meditation. Like, meditation is not considered to be more or less of a spiritual practice than what we're doing now. Discussing, inquiring, reasoning. Which brings me to an even more important point before I begin with tonight's discussion. Before I get into these 3 sections that make up our conversation on partying, this is maybe the most important thing I could say. It prefaces everything, and it tells you how to interact with the material tonight. Remember, according to Abhinavagupta, chapter 2 of the Tantra Sara, when he's telling us about anupaya, you cannot, in any way, shape, or form, attain liberation. Because to attain liberation would be to imply that it's something other than you. Like I said last week, attaining liberation would be something that happens in time. Before you attain liberation, you were not yet liberated. Then when you attained liberation, you became liberated. That means there was a start to your liberation, no? And it's a big problem, because like I said last week, if something starts, it can also potentially end. So that liberation then is not really liberation. If anything, it's just a state that might arise and that might dissolve. It is not free of laya and udaya, dissolving and arising. So the absolute nature of reality, according to Abhinavagupta and the Paramartha Sara, is laya udaya vihinam, free of all rising and setting. Not to say it's static, but that it is constant and constantly dynamically pulsating and throbbing in and as all things. Therefore, it cannot be attained. How can you attain it? It is not something other than you to be attained. So that's the second problem. If you say that it's something to be attained, you're not only implying a temporality, which is a flaw in the soteriological model, but you're also implying a sort of objectivity or an otherness. then this enlightenment or this liberation is a kind of object that can be acquired. Things that start can end, and things that can be acquired can be lost. So why would you want something that you can attain or acquire when that very thing can also be lost? It's not something other than you to be attained. And of course, when you get the metaphysic, as we will in just a few moments discuss, you'll realize that this is not possible in a non-dual model. Because in a non-dual model, there's only one reality. A monistic model will say Shiva alone exists, the absolute alone exists, it's synonymous with the self, it's synonymous with consciousness, and the world is not different from it. So if there's nothing other than this absolute, who will attain what? What is there to be attained that's outside of the self, of consciousness, of Shiva? So that's why it's not something to be attained. So Abhinavagupta starts by saying it is not a thing to be attained, nor is it about entering or being entered into. So it's not like Shiva enters into you and then you're liberated. Nor can you enter into Shiva or immerse yourself in the ocean of Brahman. The drop can never become the ocean, because that implies the drop is something other than the ocean, and there's a process of dropness becoming oceanness. You see, again, temporality, again, duality, that wouldn't work here. So it's not something that you can enter into, nor is it something that will enter into you. So it's not an attainment, it's not an avesha or praveshana kind of thing, nor is it the kind of thing that's hidden that needs to be revealed. Because to suggest a veil, to suggest that there's something hiding reality from you, is again to suggest an other. There's something other than reality which is able to veil reality from you. And now what? Is spiritual life a process of removing that veil to uncover what was already there? No, because if that was the case, then there would be a veil. But again, as you'll see in a few moments when we explore the metaphysic, it's not possible for there to be a veil in a non-dual context. Nothing other than it exists to veil it. So the absolute cannot be veiled, it cannot be attained, it cannot be entered into, nor is it something that enters into you. It just is. And therefore, the only conversation we can have here from the point of view of sadhana, spiritual practice, is pratyabhigya, recognition. Either there's abheda, kyati, or abheda akyati. Either you recognize non-duality or you don't recognize non-duality. Now, ask yourself, have you recognized something before in your life? And of course you have. For instance, if I'm talking to somebody and I don't remember who they are, I might have met them before, but I forgot, and now I'm talking to them and I'm seeing them. The whole time I'm seeing them, I'm having this conversation with them, but I don't yet recognize them. Then somebody comes up to me and says, oh, do you know this is so-and-so? This person, you actually met them last year at the retreat in Denver. This is that person actually. They look different now, but this is that same person. And then in that moment, I have pratyabhigya, a special kind of cognition that helps me identify what I'm seeing. I now know what I'm talking to and looking at. Before, I was looking at it and talking to it. The whole time I was having the cognition of this person, but I didn't recognize what that meant. The meaning of my experience was not clear to me. So someone had to come along and give me the name or give me the word or indicate what the meaning of this experience is. Once I hear that, that's all it took. I don't need to necessarily go and sit and meditate until I can articulate to myself that this is indeed that person that I met last year in Denver. I don't have to do that. The moment someone tells me who this is, because I've known them before, I should immediately recognize them again now. I'm not getting a new cognition. Notice I'm not attaining a state. What's already the case, what's already in front of me is now just being understood for what it truly is, beyond my superimposition of what I think it is, or beyond, I should say, not superimposition, but my lack of recognition or understanding of what I think it is. So that being said, this process of tarka, tarko yogango uttama, the reason why it's the best type of spiritual practice is because, according to Abhinavagupta, it removes the scent of duality. In other words, not to say it's removing a veil. No veil exists that can veil reality. But in other words, it's just telling you what you're looking at. It's just a pointer, an indication. Therefore, the only sadhana here is shravana. Just to hear, just to listen, and be told what it is that this world is, what it is that you are, what it is that God is. And those three, world, you, and God, that triad, is reconciled in one word, Shiva, which is synonymous with samvit, consciousness, which is essentially what you are, Atman. All this is verily the self. Tattvamasi Shvetaketu. All you have to do is hear that. That's it. That's the whole sadhana. You just hear it. Tattvamasi, that thou art. But that's not enough. Many are those, blessed are those who hear, but twice blessed are those who understand. Because it's not enough to hear, you must understand what you heard. And most of us don't even hear. And even if we do hear, we forget. But those of us who hear and remember, the second stage here is to understand, and that's where the tarka comes. Tarka is the analysis. That's the discussion, the debate, the conversation. That's part 4 of tonight's discussion. That's very important. And as you do that, as you engage the buddhi, the intellect, in this process of reasoning, once you come to a settled conviction and a conclusion, it's not a dogma that you believe in. It's not something that you want to be true and act as if it is true. It's something that you recognize as true. Only then you can say you're free. Jnana moksha hetuhu. The cause of liberation is knowledge. But that knowledge, that jnana, is of the form pratyabhijna, recognition. Never approach anything except as God. Don't look for God, see God. These are all things that Swami Vivekananda said. You see, these instructions embody the pratyabhijna model. It's just recognize it. Like, don't approach it as a table. Approach it, see God first before you see the table. Don't seek God, see God. And more importantly, never approach anything except as God. For only God exists, blazing forth as the self, in which appears all these things which are non-different from the self. Any more than a reflection in a mirror is different from the glass in which it shines. Like that, there's a possibility tonight that we'll be free, all of us, because we already are. Freedom, svatantriya, is our essential nature, and we're only one recognition away. We just need the words for it, you see. Once we have the words, those words, that shuddha vikalpa, that thought construct, indirectly indicates what is already true, and upon recognition, then we just, as it were, enjoy our pension. The rest of our life is just a blazing forth of that recognition. In each and every moment, it is recognized anew. Which brings me maybe to one more point. There's some newness and novelty to this sort of recognition, because the fact of the manifold is not rejected in Śaiva monism, as you'll see in a few moments. Again, all of this is still preface. The Śaiva monistic model will actually admit that the world is real, but real as Shiva, without rejecting the manifold expression of Shiva in all things as all things. And you can't deny that the world is a variety of things. There are some plants that are poisonous, some that are sweet, some people that are poisonous, some people that are sweet. There are all kinds of people in this world, all kinds of animals, all kinds of plants. And as you live your life, you have all kinds of experiences. You come into contact with people, you come into contact with animals and plants, you come into contact with places and circumstances and situations, and they're always changing. There's a dynamism inherently presenting itself as every new cognition, which, even if it's like something you've experienced before, is now something very new because you've changed. By the time you experience the same thing again, you're no longer the same one who experienced it before. So even if it's the same chocolate cake from the same restaurant, it will never be the same as that chocolate cake you had at that same restaurant a year ago. You're not the same, the chocolate cake maker is not the same, the world is not the same, nothing is ever the same. Thank God, because then this recognition is not static, it's not something that just happens once. It's a dynamic, ongoing dialogue with reality in which each and every moment, reality is reflecting back to you this truth, which you're recognizing again and again with novelty. That's what makes this pratyabhijna a sort of nityodita experience, a constantly new, ever fresh, novel discovery, poetic rapture. So the model we give is of Bhairava, Shiva embodied, Shiva incarnate, Jivan Mukti par excellence, right? Like there's a body, there's an experiencer, and that experiencer is experiencing a world, and never does that experiencer for any moment of time forget his true nature as Sadashiva. So that transcendental reality Sadashiva, embodied as Bhairava, is Vijñāna-Bhairava, Ruru-Bhairava, Chanda-Bhairava. He's angry, he's sad, he's experiencing the whole range of emotions, and it's always new. So the image of Bhairava is of somebody whose eyes are open, not closed in deep meditation, as you often see in the iconography around Sadashiva, a transcendental sort of icon. But this transcendent immanent Bhairava, who is both the supreme hedonist and the supreme ascetic at once, that Bhairava has open eyes. And not just open eyes, unblinking eyes, wide open eyes. And he's often in a state of arousal or a state of joy, and this is called chamatkara, poetic rapture. So to be constantly in a state of wonderment and poetic rapture, again referencing the aesthetic emphasis in our tradition, is what it looks like to be Bhairava or Bhairavi. ānanda-Bhairava, ānanda-Bhairavi, the ever blissful, ever liberated, ever free, expressive, dynamic, empowered, embodied Shiva. That's the Soteriology. You see, so I just want to just offer this in the beginning of the discussion. It's this should be really exciting to you, because we're just one sentence away or one thought away from recognizing what has always been true, what will always be true, and what is definitely true now. In the Mandukya Upanishad, Sarvam Omkara Eva. All of this is verily Om. Om was all there was, Om is all there will be, Om is what is, and you are that Om. So, you would have heard some of this before in other contexts, but it's never old, never gets old. Because the recognition, like I just said, is nityodita, always fresh, always novel, always spontaneously reproducing itself. And so this discussion, although it might be familiar to some of you who've been studying this for a long time, some of you have been studying Advaita Vedanta also, so you will hear similar ideas there. But be that as it may, however many times you hear this, it never gets old. I once asked Vijaya some time ago, I'm like, dude, I just say the same thing again and again and again, over and over, every single lecture. Will people get bored? Like, do I have to like diversify what I want to talk about? Because really there's only one thing to say, and I've just been saying it again and again and again. Like, should I think about new things to say? And Vijaya laughed at me and she's like, but you like read the same things again and again and again and listen to the same talks again and again and again. All you do all day long is interact with the same idea again and again and again. Are you bored? It's like, damn, that's a good point. It never gets old. That recognition, looking in the mirror and seeing your own beauty reflected is constantly ennobling, constantly enriching. Therefore, I don't look at the mirror once. We all of us, like any chance we get, we look at the mirror. Because every time we look in the mirror, it's the same face, yet it looks different today. It looks different in the evening, it looks different after meditation, it looks different in the morning, it looks different every time you look. And so therefore, it's nice to look. It's nice to look into the mirror and appreciate your own face, which is the same face, and your own beauty, which is the same beauty, but with new eyes. That chamatkara, that poetic rapture, is rooted in a kind of novelty. And that novelty, that freshness, is something worth mentioning too. So if nothing else, you guys, this discussion is just like looking in a mirror. I'll just throw a bunch of words at you, and those words are shuddha vikalpas, concepts that act as a kind of mirror to reflect the reality of what you are and what this world is and what God is. The one singular reality which we call Shiva, which is none other than samvit, consciousness, which is atma, your very own self. And so that is nothing but a mirror. These words, these are all just like so many mirrors. And every time we look into those mirrors, oh, we feel so happy. It's like seeing the same thing again and again, but with new eyes. Okay, so having said all of that, another preface before I start. All of this is, let me just give you an anecdote why this discussion is happening at all. So I was so happy last week. We spent some time in Phoenix. There's Kali Dasi there, and we had some wonderful pujas for Arka Mandaleshwari Kali, who was installed during Navaratri, on Panchami actually, Panchami Navaratri. And then Royji was so kind, he hosted us in his house, and we had a Navaratri Amavasya Homa in his house. And then we had a nice jam there too, there were musical instruments and a band. It was wonderful. So I had a great time in Phoenix. And I went to go see a show. My friend is a DJ, so I went to go see her show, and she runs a production company, so I was like supporting some of her events. But I didn't get a return ticket, so I just went and stayed for a little while, and I got a nice chance to like explore the Phoenix scene, you know. So at this afters, in Phoenix, like somebody comes up to me in the middle of the night, just like on the dance floor, right, like out of nowhere, and says to me, Jesus, I'm so sorry for partying. It's so funny. Of course, naturally, I took him aside. I was like, dude, like, it is good that they eat and drink and make merry, for they are in the presence of the bridegroom. The Christ's first miracle was keeping the party going. You know, the wine ran out at this wedding, and he's like, that's unacceptable. Let me, as the incarnation of the Absolute, as the Son of God, do my job. And that is to turn water back into wine so people can go on having a great time. Notice the joy and the cheer and the delight aspect of Christianity is something that we forget about when we interact with churches that are rooted in grave, solemn, heavy sorts of dialogues, you know? So like the Christ, I don't think was a heavy, solemn, or grave person. Insofar as his first miracle is keeping the party going, insofar as there are like things, like all throughout the Bible, you get this word again and again and again and again. Rejoice. Rejoice, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. There's a constant narrative of rejoicing. Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's like maybe the focus in modern Abrahamic Western Christianity. It's like you should repent. But again, that repent word is sort of similar to the rejoice. Rejoice, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is good that they eat and drink and make merry, for they are in the presence of the bridegroom. So like that was interesting to me. So a lot of this lecture is sort of like a response to that person who felt some tension in themselves because they wanted to experience joy, they wanted to experience the world, and on some level they felt like that was theologically inappropriate, that somehow they'd chosen one path and that was mutually exclusive from the other path, and they felt bad about it. They were repenting. So I wanted to present this model of the Christ as like a joyful, fun individual in whose company you felt cheer and you would party, you know, you have a great time. And I remember the Gaudiya Vaishnava world, I met someone who was in that tradition, and she told me that she used to love, like, big hardcore rave girl, but then she was telling me that like nowadays I just like kirtan because Chaitanya is like the OG spiritual raver. I get the same joy going to kirtans and things like that. So when we think of Jesus, we see places where he talks about joy and partying. When we look at Chaitanya, what was he but the primordial spiritual raver? He loved to get people together. The big Gaudiya Vaishnava contribution to Bengali spirituality is this congregational sort of thing where everybody, no matter what caste or gender, no matter what orientation, like even what theological disposition you might have, just getting together and singing and celebrating and rejoicing in the name of the divine. That's one of the contributions of the Gaudiya Vaishnava world. Congregational spirituality, celebratory spirituality, eating good food, smelling the prasad flowers, singing and dancing, which is, I mean, who doesn't like to sing and dance and get together and eat good food? Like, that's partying. So Chaitanya, notice, his bhakti was about participation, was about congregation, was about partying. And of course, the joy of singing and dancing the name of God is a bhajanananda, sort of spiritual joy. But it's not that different in one sense, at least not in kind or type, maybe in degree, from the joy that we naturally, all of us feel when we get together and sing and dance and eat good food, which is otherwise known as a party, you see. So when we look at the Christ, we see a model for partying as spiritually nourishing. We look at Chaitanya and we see the same thing, a model for partying is spiritually nourishing. Now when we come to Ramakrishna, notice the same thing is true of Ramakrishna. There was one scene, I love this scene, where he's in a carriage and they're going down the road and they go by a wine shop, a grog shop. Now remember, Sri Ramakrishna, the thing about him is that he would act like a drunk because he was intoxicated with divine bliss. I drink no ordinary wine, mine is the wine of everlasting bliss. The Guru provides the molasses, the bija mantra, for the making of the wine. Knowledge, the winemaker, distills it for me. My longing, my devotion, my bhakti is the ferment that transforms it into a liquor. And I imbibe it from the bottle of the mantra, taking Mother Kali's name to keep it pure. And now he's playing, Ramprasad in this poem is playing with the word Sudha, Ashura and Shuddha, like purity and wine. So wine, which is often considered transgressive and impure and worldly, is now considered to be pure. And what makes it pure is the Divine Mother's name. My longing, which transforms it into a liquor. My knowledge, which distills it. My mantra, which is the bottle, the vehicle through which that bliss comes. And importantly, it's no ordinary wine. I drink of this wine and people think I'm a drunk. I'm so intoxicated. This was Ramprasad's poem that Sri Ramakrishna embodied. He would stagger to and fro like a drunkard. And even Swami Vivekananda, on that fateful Tuesday when he had that first experience with Ma Kali, on his way to the mandir in Dakshineshwar, even before he had that experience of Kali in the Murti, even then he said that he was like staggering as if drunk. Already the bliss of seeing Kali was starting to like awaken within him even before he set foot into the temple. There's an atemporality to that whole event that's worth noting. So Swami Vivekananda, the bliss that he felt and embodied, I, Saki, fill the cup, let us drink to madness. The bliss that Sri Ramakrishna embodied and taught, and just the way it must have felt to be around him. You know, when you look at the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Kathamrita, the scenes are almost always of singing and dancing and conversation and congregation. People get together and have a great time. And so Sri Ramakrishna, in one case, if you say the word wine to him, you know, because he was such a Mohonmata-Bhairava, supremely intoxicated Bhairava, blissed out on God 24/7. If you say the word wine, that's enough. The moment you say wine, Shura or Karana, he immediately goes into an ecstasy. He doesn't even need to drink the wine, notice. He's such a blissed out, like, rave king, that if you just say wine, that association is enough to send him into a state of intoxication. Arguably, he practiced Vamachara, Kaulachara stuff, but allegedly he couldn't even lift the cup of wine to his mouth. He couldn't drink out of the skull bowl or coconut bowl, because the moment he saw the wine or smelled the wine or thought of wine, it reminded him of the bliss of Kali. And therefore he went into samadhi and went into a bliss and ecstasy, and he was no longer interested in the wine. He dropped the wine cup, as it were. Not just that, but there's another scene where he's in this carriage and they're going by a grog shop. And again, these are people who are just drinking regular wine and having regular worldly enjoyment. He leans out of the carriage and he more or less says, party on Wayne, party on Garth. He's excited to see people happy in whatever context. And so this model of Sri Ramakrishna as a person who's singing and dancing, who is in divine bliss, who is in ecstasy, who is bursting at the seams. One commentator said he was like a ripe pomegranate about to just explode with all that juice and life and joy. This Bhairava, who is Mahonmata, supremely intoxicated Bhairava, who is blissful and expressive and dynamic, who likes to sing and dance, who speaks in poetry. This model of Sri Ramakrishna is very important because we're confronted by this cheerful, joyous party Ramakrishna in each and every scene in the Kathamrita. It's very hard to find Sri Ramakrishna in any other mood than cheerful and joyful. Even when he's mourning the death of his relative, when Akshay is dead and he's like at the funeral, and he later says his heart felt like it was being squeezed like a towel. That was the grief that he felt. But even then he sang and danced and laughed and clapped his hands and he said, look, it's like a sword being drawn from the scabbard. He rejoiced not only at the funeral, at the thought of liberation from the body, but he also rejoiced even in the midst of his grief. It was almost like he was able to appreciate and savor that grief in an aesthetic sort of way. So it all comes down then to this aesthetics, this philosophy of meaning, this poetics that we seem to emphasize so much in our tradition. So that happened. I was at the rave and someone came up and said that to me. So that anecdote is why we're having this lecture. But another anecdote. Then the next night, I was at another afters, a different afters. This time, I saw a person standing with a cross, like a light up, flashing rave cross. Naturally, I go over and talk to them. And we're in this wonderful theological discussion. And they're like, I love to come to raves, but I also don't want to sin. And I know that it's okay for me to come and hang out here as long as I'm not sinning. So we had this conversation as to what constitutes sin. What exactly does that look like? And it's wonderful because, we had a conversation about free will also. To what extent can a person choose? And in only that sense can a person be culpable for choosing to sin, if there is indeed such a thing. So the conversation about free will is not necessary. Metaphysically, theologically, we have to have a conversation about free will before we can talk about sin and culpability and moral responsibility. So we had this wonderful discussion. And I noticed all throughout the conversation, there was like this tension in him. He like wanted to be there, but he felt bad for being there. He was using terms like the music can be satanic sometimes. So I like to put on my headphones and listen to some gospel music if the rave music becomes satanic. And so we had a conversation about Satan, like who is Satan? And is he other than God? And then there was a conversation about like other people at the rave. And he's like, do you ever wonder, these people, are they all lost? And I'm like, no one is lost. We only see in others what's there in us. So this concept of sin is not only like problematic metaphysically, it presumes free will, which we can dispense with easily, but it's also problematic personally, like spiritually, because it's unwholesome. It makes a person feel guilty for the desires and pleasures that they want to pursue, but it also makes them judgmental of others. It's almost like when we deny ourselves, then we project that onto others who are not denying themselves and we have a problem with them. So then there's this kind of hypocrisy where we want something that we think in our own concept we ought not want. And the resentment and remorse that creates within us is then projected outward. And then we start judging others. Judge not lest you be judged. That person's a sinner, that person's a sinner. They've walked this path and not the other path. Look at them partying when they really should be meditating. Like that judgment is maybe a reflection of our own inability to come to terms with our own being, our authentic being. So there's a hypocrisy and inauthentic sort of experience that one can have when we are in a particular framework, a dualistic sense of right and wrong and high and low and God and world and whatnot. So then that conversation was important to me because it was the same thing as the previous night at that rave when that person was telling me about repenting for partying, and this person who is at the rave who feels bad for being there. Like the two of them seem to have the same theme. And I think the Sukhopaya, the Śaiva monistic model which emphasizes aesthetic bliss, that might be the cure, the non-dual cure for this sort of schism that we have in our minds. Then he gave me his light up cross, which I loved. He couldn't understand why I didn't want it to flash. I didn't want it to be many colors. I just wanted it to stay red and let it just like glow red. And then the whole night I just had this like rave cross. And I was stunned and impressed because people would come. I would be in this like bus and the bus would be shaking with people jumping around. And then someone would come and they would see the cross and then like cross themselves and become very like reverent, which was beautiful. That was beautiful to see. It was almost like the opposite sort of experience where someone is there and having a great time and they're recognizing God in the midst of all of that and feeling reverence for it. And then I saw a girl who had a shirt and I took a picture of that and sent it to some of you, but the shirt said, Jesus loves crystal meth. I just thought it was so funny because that shirt next to those two anecdotes made me feel like a conversation around Sukhopaya, the path of pleasure, the path of partying. That might be cool to have, no? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to do something interesting. Before I get into the material, I'm just going to pause and see if there are like any questions right now before I get into the stuff. Because the next thing I'm going to talk about is pretty subtle. I want to introduce you to a text first though. Before we can talk about aesthetics and metaphysics and the soteriology that comes from a metaphysically, aesthetically oriented monism, notice there are some works that Abhinavagupta draws very heavily from. The first one that I want to introduce you to, it's available in English translation, I think, but somewhat pricey. It's Harvard University Press, I think, that put it out. It's a rare book. It's called Dhvanya-loka. Dhvani, I'll talk a lot about it later, is a technical term that means suggestion. So something is poetic because it's able to suggest something beyond literal meaning. That's more or less what Dhvani means. Dhvani, it's like double entendre, or it's like a meaning or like a significance that's more than just the words, more than just the structure of the poem. So in Indian aesthetic theory or in like poetics, in other words, in axiology, there are texts like this, the Dhvanya-loka, that comment on poetry. They're like literary critics, who are asking what makes this poem a poem? What makes a work of literature beautiful and profound? And so then we have this wonderful conversation like, Dhvani, what is suggested, what is suggested by the words, and how is it that this dhvani can arise when the words literally mean something else? Like, how are you looking at words that literally mean X and you're able to discern a non-literal elliptical meaning Y? How did you get Y from X? Clearly there's more to the words than just the structure, than just the etymology, than just the direct prima facie meaning. So that suggestion, that's something that ānanda-Vartana, the author of Vijñāna-Bhairava, wants to explore. Now, this is important because he was a Rajanaka in the court of King Avantivarman. So in Kashmir, there was a very important king who patronized a lot of the arts and a lot of spirituality. And in that time, during the reign of King Avantivarman, there was this great aesthetician named ānanda-Vartana. And his work, Vijñāna-Bhairava, is important because it's like a groundbreaking seminal work in Indian aesthetics and Indian poetics. So when people study it, it's often just like outside of spiritual context. It's not necessarily a spiritual text. It's not a tantra. It's not giving you rituals. It's not even giving you like Upanishadic or agamic philosophy. It's not at all about spirituality. And yet, what could be more spiritual than finding out what makes a poem a poem? Like, what is it about a poem that is poetic? So it's called aesthetics or poetics or something. It's like a whole other discipline in classical Sanskrit literature. But what Abhinavagupta uniquely does in the context of Shaiva monism is he brings in that Kashmiri, like court pundit, court poet aesthetic discussion into his spirituality, because he's able to see the deep spiritual significance of what somebody like ānanda-Vartana is pointing out in the Vijñāna-Bhairava in his commentary on poetics. So Abhinava importantly writes a lochana. The word lochana means eye. So it's called the Vijñāna-Loka Lochana. This is a text, a classical Sanskrit text, probably like it's attributed to Abhinavagupta. It's a bit, during his time, but it's a commentary. Lochana means eye. So lochana, like Vartika or like Bhasha or like Vivriti, it means Abhinavagupta is about to comment on the Vijñāna-Loka. Vijñāna-Loka. The word Vanya itself, Vijñāna-Loka means aloka, light on Dhvani. Dhvani means suggestion or poetics. So light on poetry. This is a book on Indian poetics in the classical Sanskrit tradition. So Abhinavagupta writes the Lochana, and here he's just like showing you his power as an aesthetician. Here he's just telling you about like what he thinks of that work, and he's not talking about Shiva or the 36 tattvas, or he's not talking about Anavopaya or Shaktopaya or Shambhavapaya, none of that. All this stuff you get from his philosophical works like the Malini Vijaya-Vartika, which by the way is just a commentary on like the first verse of the Malini Vijaya-Vartika Tantra. The Tantra Loka, which is mostly just ritual manuals, that's again a spiritual work which is a commentary on the Malini Vijaya-Vartika Tantra as well as some other tantras. He has these Ishvara Pratya Bhigya Vivriti Vimarshanis, like these commentaries on his guru's work, which are all spiritual and philosophical. This is not that. Vijñāna-Loka Lochana is Abhinava as an aesthetician, as a poetic philosopher, commenting on this text in 4 parts with the Karikas and the Vrittis regarding poetics. So that's the text Vijñāna-Loka by ānanda-Vartana. You might be able to find it on the internet. I have a Sanskrit version of it, but I know somebody translated it. I think Harvard University Press has an English translation of the Vijñāna-Loka text. But then Abhinava gives our commentary called Lochana. So Vijñāna-Loka Lochana is Abhinavagupta as a tantric metaphysician applying this aesthetic model just to like Indian poetics. Now, this is also important. There's another text on theater and on dance. Poetry and dance go together. Kavya, poetry. Doesn't have to be in the context of theater, but often it is. So dancers will depict a story, for instance, and that story might first be told in a poem, in verse form. So in the Natya Shastra, attributed to Bharata, like in that text, we talk about poetics, like in the context of dance and theater. So what would it look like to enjoy theater? What makes theater theater? What is Leela? What is Natar? Abhinava importantly also comments on that. So he's not just commenting on poetics as in literature, he's also commenting on dance and theater and performance, and this is called the Abhinava Bharati. Now that is a commentary on the Natya Shastra. So based on these commentaries, Abhinava articulates this rasa vada, this doctrine of flavor, doctrine of taste. And the word rasa, of course, appears there in the ānanda-Vartana Vijñāna-Bhairava as well. That word is there. Like it's there, of course, in the Natya Shastra. It's the flavor or the aesthetic appreciation of a particular artwork. If something is a tragedy, we feel grief, that's a rasa. And that rasa was invoked in us by the evocative things that you saw on stage. So Sri Ramakrishna, importantly, was very fond of theater. At a time when theater was seen as like hedonistic and debauched, which was associated like, to sex work and to drug use and to like bacchanalia and bohemian culture, like that theater, which, had a bad reputation in Bengal in the 1800s, that was something that Sri Ramakrishna enjoyed. He would go to the theater, which is revolutionary. For a spiritual person to go to the theater, it's transgressive. And he would go and he would watch plays and he would go into an ecstasy. He would cry and he would say, oh my God, that play of Sri Chaitanya's play, the actor, the woman who was acting Sri Chaitanya, she did it so well, or Vishnu Priya or something, she did so well that it was like there was no difference between the theater and the actuality. He would say things like that. So Sri Ramakrishna loved theater. He loved poetry. He loved art. He loved music. He had a special affinity for musicians. He loved to talk to musicians and actors. And he himself was a great singer. And he would improvise verses and things like that while they were all doing kirtan together. So notice, Girish Chandra Ghosh, the father of modern Bengali theatre, and Kali Prasad, and Binodini, and Tara, these are all like fixtures of Bengali theatre that Sri Ramakrishna was deeply, intimately associated with. So he was Girish's guru. And more importantly, his advice to Girish is very Vijñāna-Bhairava verse 65 onwards. It's very Kaulachara, very Vamachara. And so Sri Ramakrishna being a fan of theatre is important because it links Sri Ramakrishna, especially insofar as we're considering his appreciation for music, art, and poetry, and of course theatre. It links Sri Ramakrishna and his joyous, cheerful approach to spiritual life. It links that with the Abhinavagupta aesthetic inquiry into the Dvanya Lochana, into Natya Shastra, Abhinava's commentary called the Bharati, and that's what I wanted to emphasize today. So we can't talk about partying as a spiritual practice without first establishing this theory of rasa, this theory of flavor, which is rooted in Indian aesthetics, Indian poetics. So just for citation's sake, Dvanya Lochana. It's Abhinavagupta's seminal work on Indian poetics. And that's like mainly what I'll be drawing from. For the metaphysics and for the cosmology and for the Soteriology, of course, you'll find that in works like the Malini Vijayavartika, Tantra Loka, Tantra Sara, but mainly you'll find it in places like the Ishvara Pratya Bhigya Vivritti Vimarshini, the Laghu Vritti. There's two vrittis, two commentaries. These are all the classical Sanskrit literature informing the discussion that we're going to have now, in case you wanted those citations. Okay. I'm just going to pause for a bit and see if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, because the next part is subtle. I'm going to take our time with it because, like I said earlier, it's possible to at once see the view and be permanently established in the view such that each and every moment is ever fresh, ever new encounter with reality, as if looking into a mirror and marveling at your own beauty again and again and again. Okay, so I'm going to pause. So this next thing is subtle. That's why I want to take a bit of a break and a bit of a breather. Now, I'm going to say a few things. This is a direct pointing. Not direct, indirect pointing. And you're going to verify that they're true. Yes? And then when you see for yourself what these words are pointing to, that is called pratyabhikya. So we'll start with this. We'll start with the model that most of us assume, and then I'll reject that model. So the model is materialist reductionism. It's the model that proposes consciousness is emergent. So there's matter first, like rocks and shit, and like there's a big bang. Of course, no self-respecting scientist will posit the Big Bang as a theory of causality. It's not. The Big Bang is not meant to be a theory of causality. It's an explanation for the expansion of the universe, as it were. So there's an event, allegedly, the Big Bang, and then solar systems form, and then there's like material. There's raw material, like rocks and shit. Like inert material. Then, somehow, through some accident of nature, proteins get developed. Some 11 or 12 base proteins or something that get developed. And then through those biological development in a certain rock third removed from the sun, there emerges these organisms, like arguably the first beings in an otherwise inert universe are like these protoplasmic single-celled beings, and then they become more complicated. So they, say like there's like a being that gets eaten by another being, and that first being gets assimilated and becomes like the Golgi apparatus or something like that. So now we get these multicellular organisms, and like there's like a biological complexity occurring. You can almost imagine it's like a fetus in the womb, starting out as like a zygote and then becoming a blastocyte. Like there's a complexity increasing with that being. So then through this long evolutionary process of complexity, through variations and mutations and through quote unquote natural selection, like what ends up happening in this Darwinian biological model of evolution, which again is founded upon a materialist view of the universe, is that you get consciousness as an emergent property. So now brains develop, and certain biological organisms, like mammals or whatever, have a very complex, very sophisticated sort of brain. And that brain is able to generate consciousness. And not just that, that consciousness which is generated by that brain is capable of experiencing like more of a range of things because of the brain's complexity. So what we end up getting is neuroscience. We get biology, we get physics, materiality, chemistry, and the whole thing comes down to that. So you are, according to this model, in this materialist reductionist paradigm, an emergent consciousness, but you are fundamentally body. You're fundamentally matter. You are a biological, physical being whose selfhood is constituted by electrical firings and chemical changes. So that's a view, right? And Daniel Dennett, there are some philosophers who reject consciousness entirely. They say you're just like biological zombies. Like everyone seems to be conscious and you feel like you're conscious, but consciousness is not real. It's an epiphenomenon. It emerges from matter and it's this illusion of matter, as it were. But what's real is actually matter. That's the claim. Matter is real. And so material reductionism, the inadvertent view that everyone by default sort of opts into as a result of being born in this day and age. Remember, it's the philosophical fad of our time, material reductionism, because of the influence of science. And so science is a process of inquiry. And to use Popper seriously here, it's like everyone can engage in science. Everybody can engage in this peer-reviewed, corroborated, rational inquiry into truth where knowledge is made based on experience. So knowledge claims in science are founded upon experience. That experience can be experimental. The data that you collect through observation and various other experiments is then used to inform your knowledge. So knowledge based on experience in a non-hierarchical, democratic, peer-reviewed way with falsification and all that is called science. But there's something called scientism, which is the idea that like only those things that we know from conventional science are true. Everything else is just at best poetics, but usually just dismissed as meaning-making creatures trying to like superimpose onto dead matter and inert reality some kind of meaning, you know. So we just eke out our existence, we who are biological accidents, we eke out our existence to the best of our ability, trying to survive and trying to reproduce, and we create meaning systems and values around survival and reproduction. For instance, if you go to college, you might think, oh, I'm going there for higher learning. But in fact, most people are probably going to college because they want to get a good job. So notice the instinct for survival in the complex mammalian structure of the human brain can turn into like a desire to go to college and study. And even a liberal arts degree, on some level, we think will give us access to the world of more or less, let me put it this way. I'll put it coarsely. It's like it makes our LinkedIn better. So we value education. We value higher learning, not for learning's sake, but because on LinkedIn we'll be hired and we'll get better jobs. Notice, if the world is fundamentally material, and if you are fundamentally a material being, chemical, biological material being, then it makes sense that the purpose of life is to accumulate material. So material reductionism, which is the philosophical fad of our day and age, is also intimately associated to consumer capitalism, because now the value is in the thing and we're buying and trading and transacting based on things. So happiness looks like having more things. The bigger your house, the bigger your car, the more things in your life, the happier you'll be, because things are real. So in the material reductionist worldview, if things are fundamentally real, then your life is about those things. And so you come to identify with the body and with the world and with your car and with your house more strongly when you feel material to be real. So the teleology or the axiology around reductionist materialist worldview is this: my life is about accumulating materials. That's what materialism really is. So it's greed, you could say the whole function of greed is a survival project, a reproduction project, based on the axiom that this is all there is, that this is what is real. Now, if the world is real, then my engagement with the world is real, and the joy that the world can give me is also real. So it makes sense then that I should have a job, get money, pursue pleasure, like spend my money on experiences, and those experiences could be like chemically induced states of ecstasy, states of high, like whatever the case may be. That's material reductionism. So it's not just consumer capitalism, it's also hedonism. The idea that like the purpose of getting money is to get more experiences, and the purpose of experiences is just for joy, for fun. But the joy and the fun, notice, is here confined to that experience. So I need money. With that money, I'll get a particular experience, like I'll go on vacation or something to the Bahamas. That experience makes me happy. Material makes me happy. That's the view in reductionist materialism. Because that's the view that we more or less implicitly believe. Let's respond to it. So we can respond to it in 4 ways, at least 4 ways, if not more. The first problem is called, very famous, articulated by David Chalmers, it's called the hard problem of consciousness. Science doesn't actually, as it stands now, it doesn't actually offer that explanation, that consciousness emerges from the brain. It's just assumed, because matter is assumed to be fundamental, matter energy. It's assumed that because we're conscious, that must be emergent. Matter came first, then I came, And with my complex brain, now I feel conscious. So matter creates consciousness. Therefore, most of us think that the brain generates consciousness. Through some chemical, electrical signals in the brain, we have this first-person perspective, this experience of being conscious. And then in that consciousness, we have all of our other experiences. Poetry and thoughts and dreams. And of course, our interaction with the physical world is through that consciousness, mediated by that consciousness. But that consciousness emerges from the brain. Here's the thing though, that's an assumption. It's an assumption based on privileging matter as being ontologically prior to all things. Because in theory, that makes sense. In practice, no scientist is able to show yet, and ever, as you'll soon see, that the brain is generating consciousness. It's very hard for people to understand this point. This is a subtle point. That's why I wanted the break first. Because to be able to understand this point requires that you distinguish consciousness, which is your first person witnessing, from the things that you are conscious of, which could be very subtle, like thoughts, like emotions, like dreams. So in the Western epistemological dialogues around consciousness, notice the reason why we can't get anywhere is because we don't have clear definitions as to what consciousness is or isn't. We all mean different things by the word consciousness. Some of us use the word awareness and distinguish that from consciousness. Witnessing, the Sanskrit tradition is full of words, chit, chitti, samvit, sakshi, so many different words for consciousness, Chetana. So then, the conversation is about brain and about consciousness. The reason why we think the brain generates consciousness, though, is because scientifically, experimentally, there are clear correlations, or at least clear causations, if you want to go so far, as to what you do to the brain and how that colors your experience. So for example, the landmark study here is the Phineas Gage case, right? So this is what revolutionizes psychology and conscious studies and moves that whole discipline away from behavioral, phenomenological models that we saw with, like, say, William James is interesting because he's a Harvard-based, he met Swami Vivekananda and he was very fond of Swami Vivekananda, but William James was doing a kind of psychology that was closer to what we do, phenomenology. He's studying consciousness as consciousness, from within consciousness. But what happens with this view that the brain generates consciousness is that we move away from that. We start moving towards the brain. And that's so attractive because we now have technology to, like, make more inquiry into the brain. So therefore, if I can study the brain, which is a physical object that I can see, and I already believe physical objects are ultimately real, that's way better a way to do psychology than just like thinking about stuff and feeling what it's like to be me and then sitting on a couch and telling someone about my mother, So the Freud stuff, the Jung stuff, even the Reichian stuff, all of that becomes secondary. It's too soft. A harder science would look like actually studying the brain, hooking it up to machines, and then like having those machines tell us something about ourselves. Now it's true, in the Phineas Gage case, which is how the shift, I would argue, happened, we saw a guy who was a certain way and who had a certain experience in life, and then he had an accident. I think he was in a mining shaft or something, and then something stabs him through the eye and damages his prefrontal cortex. Suddenly, the guy is totally different the next day. When he gets out of the surgery, he's no longer able to control himself. He has no discipline anymore, and he just swears all the time now, apparently. So now he's like uncouth. Before he was perfectly a law-abiding, polite, like, person of the time. Now he's just swearing, and he like just is different. He's different. Something's different about him. And so we can make claims like this. The prefrontal cortex regulates things. It's where we make decisions. It's how we exercise discipline and how we enforce our will. When that was damaged in Phineas Gage, he was no longer able to do those things. Then we have rats in mazes and, B.F. Skinner and whatnot, where if you take out their hippocampus, their memory faculty, they're no longer able to get out of the maze. The only way the rat can navigate out of the maze is if it remembered which paths are dead ends. But it won't be able to do that if it doesn't have hippocampus. So notice, the brain is obviously important here. The hardware is important for the software. If you don't have the phone, will you be able to access the apps? And the apps here are things like discipline, reasoning, memory, visualization even. There's all these wonderful studies of visualization and how in certain parts of the brain are impaired, you can't visualize anything. Or there's like wonderful discussions about the right side and the left side of the brain. These are dated terms. But if you remove the cerebellum, or what do you call it, the thing in the middle? If you remove that thing in the middle, there's like this weird thing where people are hallucinating facts. It's called confabulation. And you guys, this is such a cool Google, confabulation. There's like a landmark study here where this guy, a corpus callosum, thank you. When you remove it, there's no dialogue between the imagistic part of your brain, arguably, and the labeling, reasoning, thinking, analytical part of your brain. So this is crazy. There's a word confabulation. It's a technical term in psychology, and it comes from this paper. So what happened was, like, this guy lost that part of the brain called the corpus callosum or whatever, right? So the right and left eyes are related to those things. So they showed this guy through one eye an image of certain things. Then they asked him what he saw. And it's weird because there was a lacuna. There was something that he couldn't see. Like, all the researchers know this. He didn't know this. There was something that he couldn't see. That lacuna, he filled in with a story that he believed. It's remarkable. So he confabulated something, like an AI hallucinating. He needed to make sense of a gap in his understanding, so he filled it with an assumption, with a thought. And that was manifestly wrong. It was clear to the experiment, like, the psychologist, it was wrong. But he believed it. He believed his own justification to fill the lacuna, which could be what's happening with us. Like, we're just creating these stories about our life. And that's just the nature of that part of the mind to do that. The part of the brain that confabulates. It might be confabulating right now, because of a lack of complete knowledge. This is a landmark study, though, because confabulation shows that the brain is important. That if you remove one thing, you have a completely different experience. The personality changes, your memories change, your experience changes. But here's the thing, though, right? If you don't define consciousness, you might start to think that thoughts are consciousness, emotions are consciousness, dreams are consciousness. No, they're not. Dreams, thoughts, emotions, they're subtler than chocolate cake and orgasms. They're subtler than the breeze brushing your face on the spring, in the springtime air. But they're still experiences. Whether it's the chocolate cake or the breeze, it's an experience. Whether it's a thought or a dream or a memory, it's an experience. So notice, these are all objects to consciousness. Even the thoughts are objects, subtle objects. It's the first thing that we have to recognize. So this is very hard, because in epistemology, in neuroscience, in psychology, most people don't yet appreciate this point. They conflate consciousness with conscious experience, with inner experience. Now, here's the important thing. Just because it's subjective, just because it's interior, just because it's subtle, doesn't make it any less of an object than something that is objective, or rather intersubjective and physical. So you have physical objects and subtle objects. Now, this is the first thing that we have to define. Consciousness is neither of those. Consciousness is not the object. Consciousness is the subject. So what we get from Padmapada is important. He gives us a definition of consciousness. Padmapada is Shankara's disciple. And he defines consciousness as anidam. Anidam chaitanyam. So chaitanya, consciousness, is described as that which is not this. It's a brilliant, brilliant way of defining consciousness, because you're defining it via negativa. You can't say what it is, because the moment you say it's this, you're pointing to an object. So if I say Brahman, Atman, Shiva, Kali, like B made a good point earlier. B was like, oh, like what you might call Atman or something. That's important, because it doesn't matter what we call it. Whatever we call it won't be it. Because whatever we call it will just be an object to it, a concept of it, which is appearing in a very subtle way called a thought. And so that's not it. And so the problem with this is that we can conflate the thought with the thing, just like we do in modern neuroscience, modern psychology, modern epistemology. We do it in spiritual life too. We think our idea about reality is reality, our vikalpa, our framing of reality. But again, it's the same issue. We're failing rather to distinguish between consciousness as the first person perceiver and that which is being perceived. Is this point clear? This is key. And by the way, if this point is clear, you have liberation from the point of view of Sankhya. All that Sankhya wants to show, Sankhya is a school of philosophy, all that it wants to show is that there is a difference between you, Purusha, and that which you're experiencing called Prakriti. So now it's going to list all the things that you can experience. The 5 elements out of which the world is constituted, physical world, the 5 subtle elements out of which the subtle dream realms are created, or subtle, heavenly realms are created. Hell realms too. These are all subtle states that exist, but they're experienced the way you would experience physical materiality. Then you have your 5 organs of perception, and emanating from them are the 5 organs of action. And more importantly, this is Sankhya's central contribution. You have a mind in which there's an intellect, an ego, this is key, an ego and memory. Now, how can I be any of those things when I can count them? The word Sankhya just means to count. So if I can count these things, these 5 elements, these 5 subtle elements, these 5 organs of action, these 5 organs of perception, these 4 parts of the mind, if I can count them, it means I can indicate them, I can point to them. It means they're appearing to me as objects of my experience. Therefore, when Shankara says, Manno buddhi ahankara chittani naham, that's a huge statement. Naham, I am not. Manas, mind. Buddhi, intellect. And also, this is stunning, ego. I am not I is essentially what Shankara just said. Because the I, notice, can be located as an object. That's why Greg Good, the American psychologist and non-dualist, has this great experiment. He says, where are you? Like, where in the body do you feel yourself to be? Like, where are you sitting? Where is the seat of your consciousness? Can you show me? Does anybody want to play this game with me? It's Greg Good's consciousness game. So if you're not aware, okay, no, you guys are you've been studying this stuff for too long. But where do you, right now, just naively, just feeling the body and feeling yourself in the room and becoming aware of your own being, where are you located? Is it below the waist? I mean, for some of you. Is it in the belly? Some Greek philosophers say the seat of consciousness is in the belly. Some say the heart, right? Many, though, Greg Good found in his study, many will say here somewhere. Right? I'm naively, doesn't it feel like you're here? like you're sort of situated like in the upper part of the body, and you can become aware of the toes, but they feel like an extremity. They feel like kind of removed, separate from this sense of being here in my head. Okay, this is very important. Can you point to a place in your body where you feel yourself seated? A lot of people will. They'll point to the heart. They'll point to the head. And by the way, it makes sense to say the head because all our sense organs are here. So the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, most of them are here. So we feel ourselves to be here. And when we close our eyes and visualize, notice, where do you see that vision? In the heart? It's very hard actually. The spiritual practices tell us to visualize Kali in the heart. It's hard to do because when you close your eyes and try to visualize, what will happen is most of the time you're going to see that vision as if it's in front of you, right? It's like level with your eyes, you're looking at the vision and you're visualizing something. That's how we've been trained to see. So Swami Ashokananda says that through meditation, you learn to like unstick your seeing from your eyes. In other words, seeing within the heart is a different kind of seeing than seeing through the eyes. But when you start your meditation practice and somebody tells you to visualize Kali in the heart, it's hard to get away from the eyes and get away from the sense of being in the head. Why is this important? Because you can point to it. If you can point to the heart, or if you can point to the head, and you can say, I am here, that's not you then. Anidam chaitanyam. Consciousness is not this. So if I can point to it, if I can count it, if I can sense it, if I can refer to it, it cannot be consciousness. It is an object to consciousness. Anidam chaitanyam. Isn't this brilliant? It's a sadhana. All you have to do is sit there and notice what you can notice. And by noticing it, immediately affirm to yourself, it cannot be me, for it is appearing to me. Now, lots of great Drigdrishya Viveka exercises here. You could say, notice, I don't feel like I'm changing. But what I'm experiencing is changing. The body is changing, the mind is changing, the world is changing. But don't I feel like the same one? If I showed you a baby picture, you might say, oh, that was me. How weird. The body doesn't look the same. The thoughts aren't the same. In fact, it's hard to say that the thoughts I think now are that much different from the thoughts I was thinking when I was 16, but they are. I feel myself to be a different person than I was when I was 16. And yet, I still say it's me. Like, I am that one who was there at the 16-year-old stage. I am the one who is here now at the 29-year-old stage. Ma Willing, actually a psychic. I was at an Italian restaurant, and a lady came up to me at the table, and she said, I made some joke. We were talking, and I made some joke about like living fast and dying young or something. She said, no, I see it clearly. You will grow old. I was like, oh, Ma, thank you. You shouldn't have told me that because now you've made me intolerable. I feel invincible. I did already, so now this is even worse. I'm going to go harder tonight because of this. I'm going to be more reckless because I'm going to apparently survive till I'm older. Now, this is important though, because if I say that I am me, I will still say that I am me when I have gray hair and a gray beard, like this woman predicted. I still felt like I was me when I was 16. How could that be? How could I be the body when the body is not the same? The body of the 16-year-old is different from the body of the 60-year-old. Yet, I feel like the same one. How can that be? The mind is constantly changing. How can I be the mind when I feel like I'm the same one? So if that's the case, we can do savikara, nirvikara, vichara, distinguishing between the changing and the unchanging. The unchanging is the subject, the first person witness, and the changing is that which is witnessed. Drik, the seer, drishya, the seen, viveka, discern between the seer and the seen. And this is such a beautiful sadhana. Like you can just sit in meditation, you can walk and move about the world and just continually do this. Am I the one that's appearing to me as a thought, as an emotion, as a sensation? Am I the world? And the beauty of this sadhana is that it's already natural. You already do this. When you look at the world, you feel the world to be an other. So if I look at Brian, if I look at Savannah Ma, I'm saying that those people, Savannah in Tucson and Brian's in Montana, they're over there. I already do that because I'm experiencing them. Actually, I'm not. I'm experiencing the body and maybe the mind as I have a conversation, but I'm experiencing them, so I say they're over there and different from me. But that's natural. Like I don't have to do a sadhana to feel that way about the world. I already otherize the world. And the basis for which I do that is objectification. I can objectify it. Not to say I'm objectifying Brian, but it's appearing to me as an experience. The world is nothing but a series of experiences appearing to me, objects. Hence, they are not me. This is where we make our mistake. If this is already what we do, why don't we stay consistent and apply it to the body and mind, which are also, albeit way more intense, but which are also objects. They're also something that I can experience. So how then can I, in one place in my life, call everything an other, and in the other place in my life, call the other the self? So anatman, atman, vichara, the distinguishing between self and not self. I think I am this body, and I think I am this mind. That's a delusion. How weird. It's like saying I am this Ayurvedic copper water bottle. It's not even mine. I mean, then there's some very sophisticated conversations around, in what sense is the body yours? In what sense is the mind yours? Can you really even control it? By Kalidasa. Because do you digest your own food? Do you circulate your own blood? Even thoughts seem to have a certain randomness to them. Even if you train at meditation, it just still feels like you can't actually control the mind. Things come from nowhere and they disappear into nowhere, and the mind is this mercurial thing. So who is actually running the show? Are you doing that in the body and in the mind? You'll see. You think you are. There's a sense in which I'm controlling the body. I say, I want to lift my arm, and then I lift my arm, and there, I can prove it. I can demonstrate that my will is actionable on the level of the body. But wait, one stroke, and I won't be able to do that anymore. And more importantly, the reason I did that was because of a biological, physical, and psychological causality. So did I really choose to lift my arm? Or was there some causal chain in the physical body, in the material universe, and more importantly, in the biological, chemical, psychological experience? Was there some cause that made me lift my hand? So then in what sense am I lifting my hand? I am responding to causes and effects that are in the body and in the mind, which leads Sri Krishna to giving us this stunning teaching. And it's liberation, according to the Sankhya. So just hearing this is in Sanskrit from Sri Krishna, it's a mantra. This can be repeated, not as a mantra as in to like have a particular experience, but as a short mnemonic or short teaching that you can return to in order to ground yourself in the Sankhya understanding that I am not my objects. I'm not my mind, I'm not my intellect, I'm not my ego, I'm not my memories, I'm not my experience, whether sensual, whether mental, or whether material. And what we get from Shri Krishna is this: Prakrityaiva cha karmani kriyanani sarvashaha. And I love that line. Prakriti alone is prakritying. That's the translation. Nature is naturing. The body is bodying, the mind is minding, the world is just worlding. Prakrityaiva cha karmani kriyanani sarvashaha. All I have to do now is step back. I have to step back and look upon the whole thing as a self-contained, perfectly self-sufficient, evolving, involving, dynamic matrix of energy. A flow of experiences, if you will. So then we get these beautiful metaphors. Like imagine you're sitting at the bank of the Ganga and you're just like watching the river. And in the flow of the river, you see many things, especially in Manikarnika. You'll see bodies floating. I have a funny story, an anecdote. My grandmother was about to get into the Ganga. My grandfather was already in the Ganga. Then a body came. And my grandfather was dipping, in the Ganga, you like dip under the water. Straight up, this body that was, sometimes when you cremate, you don't get the chance or time because it's so crowded to like cremate the body fully. And not everyone cremates. Some sadhus just get pushed into the water. If you've been to a sadhu funeral, they don't actually cremate the body of the sadhu. Many times they just immerse it into the Ganga. Jal Samadhi, or immersion into the water. So there are bodies, half-burnt cremated bodies, and sadhus who've been pushed into the river, and they float down the Ganga. So my grandfather dunked his head under the water, and above his head was this body, just like kind of flowing. And my grandmother saw that. I was like, eep! She's like, I don't want to get in there anymore. She didn't like that. Then my grandfather was like, what? Get into the Ganga! You have to purify yourself of papa. This is the bath, the ablution. And you know what my grandmother said? This was theology to me. This was a sutra. She said, I have no sins. That's legit. She wanted to opt out of taking the bath in the Ganga, and she's like, yeah, I have no sins to purify right now. I have no papa. Wait, sin is a very new word, but papa, I have no impurities, no mala, no dosha that the Ganga can cure me from. And Sri Ramakrishna used to make a joke also, when people go into the Ganga, it's like saying 5 Hail Marys and then continuing your regular bullshit. It's like you do your shit and then you go to the church and then you're like, oh, I did this, I did that. Jesus, forgive me, I partied, whatever. And then they're like, oh, here's 20 Hail Marys. And then you're back on your regular bullshit or whatever. It doesn't actually make a lasting change in your life. So too with the Ganga. People go and they take their baths and they come out in the same asshole they were before they bathed. Just a cleaner asshole. So what's up with that? Isn't the Ganga liquid Brahman, as Sri Ramakrishna said? So he used to make this joke. He said, without denying the power of the Ganga, if you go into the Ganga, it's like all of your imperfections, your foibles, malas, doshas, are like crows that sit on you. And when you go into the Ganga, they all jump into the trees. They leave you, but they're waiting. And when you come out of the Ganga, then they go back, they jump back onto your shoulders. So it's like in the Ganga, you're fine. Once you leave the Ganga, they all come back. So notice, it's just an anecdote, a side story. If you use this metaphor, it's very beautiful. In the Ganga, you see all sorts of things. Bodies bobbing up and down with crows standing on them. You see malas, because there are many temples all along the banks of the Ganga, and they throw flower garlands into the Ganga. So you see malas floating. Mala is a garland of flowers. And how different are the two things? Mala is desirable. You love the mala. But the body is mala, impurity. It's scary. It's biologically, you have an aversion to it for health reasons. So the body's in the Ganga, it flows. The mala is in the Ganga, it flows. In fact, you find all sorts of things. Plastic bottles, all sorts of things. Now, you're not the mala though, nor are you the corpse. You're the one on the bank of the Ganga watching the flow of objects drift downstream. Is that not how the mind works? The body is nothing but a flow of sensation. The mind is nothing but a flow of thought. And like a person sitting on the bank of the Ganga watching one thing after another, you, Purusha, consciousness, the self, that's how you are. You just watch the world. So the illusion that you are bodying or minding is nothing but an illusion. Nature is nature. It's just a flow of things. And therefore, free will is rejected here. Prakriti is a deterministic model of cause and effect. So there was a cause, like the Big Bang, and Sankhya will accept the Big Bang in principle. There's like gunas, and those gunas are in perfect equilibrium, and then something happens, and the gunas expand. So Prakriti in Sankhya is very much like this expansionist universe model that we get in the Big Bang theory. So the universe is expanding. Now, in modern physics, they also talk about the Big Crunch. Just as there's the Big Bang, there's also the Big Crunch. You see? And that's what Sankhya will say. Prakriti both evolves and involves. It goes from a state of equilibrium to a state of expansion, and then it reaches a certain point, and then it starts to contract and dissolve back into Mahat, the original source, or Prakriti, which is the matrix out of which everything comes and into which everything goes. That Prakriti in the Sankhyan worldview is inert. It's not a goddess. It's not divinized. It's just observed. And so it's brute matter, inert matter. We're just choosing to include, importantly, thoughts. So all that we need to say now is that thoughts are a kind of matter. And you know, Napoleon Hill will say this, like in books like Think and Grow Rich. There's like a movement in America, in American New Age self-help kind of communities, where we realize that thoughts are things, actually. They're as important as material things. We are rich if we are rich in thoughts. We could be impoverished in the physical world and rich in thoughts and we'll be happy. Or we could have all the material things in the world and be impoverished in thought and we would be depressed. Mostly because thoughts are a kind of thing. That's the first observation. It's object. And most people, by the way, as hedonists, aren't really interested in material quite as much. They might be. Some people still want cars and houses. But I think most materialists are interested in experiences. They're interested in thoughts. So again, they're looking for objects, albeit a subtler object. So fascination with thoughts, with emotions, with experiences is just like fascination with cars and houses and a savings account. All of that is just fetishizing objects. The reason I do that, though, is because I think I am the body. I think I am the mind. So what Sankhya will have you do is just take a step back and watch the whole thing. Now comes a big question. What do you do once you recognize that you are not it? So if I say I am not the mind, not the intellect, not the ego, I am not the 5 organs of action, nor am I the 5 organs of perception, I am not the world composed of subtle and physical elements, now what? Okay, this is where I think we get into a bit of trouble, because Sankhya is an early philosophical school, but it's often like the foundational school for Shaivism, though Vedanta will adopt it. So more idealist, more transcendentalist, more ascetic schools will use Sankhya. Even the Bhagavata Purana, mythology, Indian mythology, is founded upon a Sankhyan cosmology. But the founder of the Sankhyan tradition might himself have been a Shaiva. And it's the Sankhyan framing of Purusha and Prakriti which develops into the Shiva Shakti model. And then Dalit Ma and others who are talking about Icha and desire, then that conversation becomes possible. At this point, it's not yet possible. We don't even talk about desire. Because does Prakriti have desire? Notice, if Prakriti had desire, if it had a will, it would be a her, not an it. But she's not a she, it's not a her, it's an it. Prakriti is a feminine noun, but that's just grammatical gender. It doesn't actually have a conscious being. And by the way, Sankhya can prove this. If you just look at your hand, this is also Greg Good. If you look at your hand, notice, are you looking at the hand or is the hand looking at you? Have you ever experienced as a rock? It's interesting. I've never experienced as the object. I've only experienced objects as the subject. Isn't that so beautiful? So therefore, consciousness, experiencing, is on the side of Purusha, not on the side of Prakriti. So the claim here is that Prakriti is not conscious because I don't experience myself as Prakriti. I experience myself as Purusha, to whom Prakriti is occurring. So notice, this is such an important point, that the world is not conscious because I'm conscious of it. It is an object. So what you get from Sankhya, many people don't understand this because they rush from Sankhya into a Shaiva model. But if you just stay with Sankhya as the foundational doctrine of so many things in India, so many things in the Sanatana Dharma world, you'll notice this. Sankhya doesn't offer a deification of the world, but neither does it offer a demonization. This is important. Sankhya doesn't call the world a conscious, like spanda. It wouldn't use the word spanda. Evolution and involution is not described as spanda. Although, you know, Joel G is right here. It's the early throb of the throb model. Like it's about to turn into the spanda theory. Yes, but it's not yet that. It's not yet a throb and a pulsation. It's just counting. And when you count the world out, you get 24 principles. And I am myself not the 25th. I'm the one to whom the 24 appear, whether in waking, dreaming, or deep sleep. So notice, if you're studying the Mandukya Upanishad, if you're studying the Kena Upanishad, or rather, if you're studying, Taittirīyopanishad has a section like this. All of it is just drigdrishya viveka, discernment between the seer and the seen. So even in Mandukya, there's the waking self and the waking world, there's a dreaming self and the dreaming world, and there's the deep sleep state. Haven't you noticed all three appear to you as objects? You can't say you're the no self because you experience that. You experience the absence of deep sleep enough to be able to say, I slept deeply. If you didn't experience deep sleep, first of all, you wouldn't have a word for it. And second of all, how would you know? Like when you wake up from deep sleep, you don't think, oh, 4 hours went by. I remember I was like in bed reading a book, and now it's the morning. I sent someone a good morning text today, but it was 4:30 p.m. and they pointed it out, and I'm like, it's relative. How is it that I wake up in the morning, whenever that is, and I just know that I slept? I don't have to do a deduction. I don't think, oh, I last remembered I was awake this time, and now I'm awake this time, so I must have deeply slept. No. If I have dreams, I remember them. If I don't, then I know that I didn't have dreams. It's not like I had dreams and forgot them. And even if that's the case, why do we have a word for deep sleep, deep dreamless sleep? It means more than just, oh, I couldn't remember my dreams. On some level, we knew. And again, you can reject all this sort of a back calculation, not that important to the argument. But the only point we're trying to make is that you're aware of deep sleep. As you were aware of the waker, not just the waking world, but the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world. So notice Mandukya Upanishad, which is one of the subtlest, most like elevated of the Upanishads. Such a profound teaching. It more or less starts with this Drigdrishya Viveka, Sankhyan idea, Neti Neti. Therefore, Padmapada's definition of consciousness is key here. He says, Anidam Chaitanyam. That's key. Anidam, not this is consciousness. You can see clearly why Buddha didn't want to have a word for it. And he was so silent on labeling and naming it, which is also tragic because it led the community, the Buddhist community, into a kind of nihilism, a shunyavada, where it's like, oh, if we don't have a name for it, then it's not a thing. And so there's no such thing as consciousness. Obviously there is. Why would you call the Buddha, the awakened one, if he wasn't awareness awakened? So he's the Buddha because he's awakened to this fact that what he is not an object. And therefore, you can only use words with regards to objects. Why even give this a word? So that's why when people would approach Ramkrishna and talk about the Buddha, they would say, isn't the Buddha a Nastika? Nasty. No, the Buddha is an atheist. In other words, doesn't the Buddha reject God? Worse, doesn't the Buddha reject the Vedas? And even worse, doesn't the Buddha reject the eternal Atman, the soul, which Hinduism proposes? The difference between Buddhism and Hinduism is accepting the Vedas as a scriptural authority, which is theologically important. Secondly, accepting God. The Buddhists are non-theist. Not to say they're atheists, they're non-theist, or at least agnostics. And thirdly, not to accept the self. Oh my God, you're soul, aren't you? Every Christian will tell you that. But the Buddhists don't think you have a soul. Does that make them like Daniel Dennett or something, thinking that we're philosophical zombies? No, far from it. So when people approached Ramkrishna and said, isn't the Buddha an atheist? His response was beautiful. He said, why should he be a Nastika, Avaidika, or atheist? He simply didn't use a word for what he found. That's important. What he found cannot be described in words, insofar as words are used for objects, and what he found is the true self, the subject. It's not an object. So if you can do this just every day, remember, prakritaiva cha karmani kriyanani sarvasha. Nature is naturing. If you can keep that awareness of this distinction between you and the world, a huge amount of space will open up. Profound space will open up. The sense of like, actually it's not happening to me. It's happening to the body and mind. It's not really my problem. And just like it started, it will end in its own time, in its own way. So when the body is sick, it kind of has a natural innate intelligence. Or when it's time to die, it will just die. Snakes know this. They go and find a branch and coil up and just die quietly off to some corner. It's no one's problem. You know, like they're chill about it. Animals know when to die. We don't. We're just keeping the body going because we think we are that body. So when it's time to die, when it's time to live, the body will handle that. When it's time to eat and when it's time to sleep, the body will handle that. But because we think we're the body, we have weird sleep diets and regimes, and we have weird diets, and like we get involved. We get involved with a process that has its own innate intelligence, and through our involvement, we fuck the whole thing up. We like throw off the body and mind's natural rhythms because of our concepts. And those concepts are premised on the axiom that I am the body. But we just showed, not told, but showed that the body is an object, like every other object in the world, like every thought. Manno buddhi ahankara chittani naham. Nacha shrotra jive, nacha grana netre, nacha vyoma bhumi, na tejo navai, chitananda rupa shivoham shivam. No. What the Buddha wouldn't do, obviously Shankara will. And non-dual teachers like Abhinavagupta also in the Trika Kaula sense will. They'll give a name to this thing that I am. So Sankhya does that. It calls it Purusha. But here's the thing, right? There are many Purushas in Sankhya. Each of you is a Purusha, which is problematic. Because if Savannah is a Purusha, if Jaya is a Purusha, if Grasini is a Purusha, Roy G, we were just talking about your house in Phoenix Sangha. So if I look at Roy and I say, oh, he's a Purusha, notice what's happening. I can access the physical presence of Roy. I can see him. And if he tells me what he's thinking, then I know what's in his mind. Or if some kind of like mind reading thing, which every Indian in a turban should have. to make money in this country. Like, if you can read thoughts, then you have access to thoughts. But what about Roy as a Purusha, which is distinct from, like we just said, body and mind? Can I have access to that? No. I actually cannot access Roy's first-person awareness. And if I could, you guys, that would be even worse. If I could access his first-person awareness, it would render into an object that which is a subject, which is violating a lot of logical rules in the law of philosophical non-reflexivity, which, by the way, you don't have to subscribe to. But in Indian logic, in Nyaya, it's problematic to say we're all separate Purushas. Firstly, because of this, because then you easily get into a category error. How can that subject be an object to me, the subject? I, the subject, cannot objectify other subjects. That's the first problem. Second problem is called the problem of solipsism, or a problem of other people. It's like there are schools of Indian philosophy like Yogacara Buddhism and Eka Jiva Vada that take this problem very seriously. I will never be able to access your first person awareness. Therefore, why should I claim that it's even there? I don't know that you aren't philosophical zombies or AI programs or simulations. It's a very scary view because it can lead to like this adumbrated, solipsistic sense of being alone in the universe, and morally like undesirable outcomes too, because you start seeing everyone as objects to be collected and used and thrown away. Like, that's obviously problematic. So to not recognize the sacred and sanctified purushatva of others is a big problem. But philosophically, epistemologically, I don't know how to identify another purusha. I can't. And okay, another problem. What would distinguish one Purusha from another? If Brian was a Purusha and if Nishant is a Purusha, what makes the Brian Purusha different from the Nishant Purusha? Notice, there's no way in which I can distinguish one Purusha from another insofar as Purushas are formless. I mean, one way to say that you're different from you is to say you look like this and you look like that. I can distinguish. But Purusha, what's the form? I mean, what's the form of your consciousness? There's a cheeky way to answer this question, which we'll get to. It's this. My consciousness looks like this, but we'll get there later. But right now, if you just take the Sankhyan theory seriously and just phenomenologically feel into your being as the witness, as the first person awareness, it has no form. It is aware of form. That's a big problem. If something has no form, how can it be distinguished from something else that has no form? And you can go further with this logic too. You could say, okay, if two things had the same form, but they were in different places at different times, good, I can distinguish them. So even if they look alike, they're in two separate places in the room, right? So then this is the one that's in this corner of the room, that's the one that's in that corner of the room. Suddenly it's no longer a problem that they're formally the same, because they're spatially distinct. What if two things had the same form and were there at the same time? Sorry, my bad. What if two things had the same form and were in the same place? Could you distinguish them? Is there a sense in which you could distinguish two things with the same form in the same place? There is actually. There's one last sense. If you can't do it by form, if you can't do it by space, yeah, Vijñāna is right, you can do it by time. You can say two things that look the same, that are in the same space, might have occupied that space at different times. So I can say it's that thing T1 and that thing T2. But what if we're talking about Purusha, which experiences time? It's not in time. What if we're talking about Purusha, which experiences space? It's not in space. And what if we're talking about Purusha, which is formless? How will you distinguish a formless, aspatial, atemporal reality from another formless, aspatial, atemporal reality when the only way that you can differentiate is through time, space, and form? Isn't that brilliant? So this is a rejection of Sankhya. Sankhya says we are all Purushas. Where Sankhya is correct is that the Purusha is distinct from Prakriti, at least for now. We'll deepen that. We'll find a subtler way of putting this. But where they make a mistake, arguably, is first and foremost in this idea that we are all separate Purushas. If there's Purusha, if I am Purusha, it must be the same Purusha in everyone. There's no way to distinguish any Purushas. And by the way, it's intuitively obvious, and we maybe can't do very much more than that you're all people. We just feel it. Satra actually has a way of describing it. He says, why do I feel ashamed when I'm doing something shameful in front of a person and not in front of a plant or a table? That already implicitly assumes on some deep intuitive level that the person is watching me, the table is not. Even people, cats, like when you're doing something in front of your cat, you might turn and look at the cat and be like, don't look at me right now, or something. You feel watched. So it's so cute. Like Satra has this theory of guilt and shame as a way to justify the feeling of being watched by another. Therefore, there must be others, intuitively. And if there are others, and if they are like me of the nature Purusha, first person witnessing consciousness, distinct from body, mind, thoughts, emotions, then we're all the same person. There's only one person. That's how we improve upon the Sankhyan duality. Another problem with Sankhya is a mathematical one, and Indian mathematics can be very spatial. We think of mathematics in a spatial way. So can you have two infinities? According to Sankhya, Prakriti is infinite. Look at the universe. Can you describe it as anything other than infinite? It's just infinitely expanding. There's dark matter, there's dark energy. Like, whoa, it's like so much diversity here. And Purusha, it too is infinite. Do you know why? Like, Purusha must be infinite, by the way. The universe is infinite because as objects, they just keep diversifying. I mean, every day, I think, scientists find hundreds, if not thousands, of new species. Not new insects, but new species of insects. That's crazy. It means like the proliferation of what we can discover in the world is literally like mind-boggling. I don't know why I said literally. Figuratively mind-boggling also. It's just so diverse and so maximal. But notice there's another kind of logic that we apply to the Purusha to prove its infinitude. What makes something finite? By now you should be getting the hang of it. Time, space, causality. No, time, space, form, maybe we would say. Desha, kala, vastu. So I'm limited in terms of these three. If Purusha is free of these three, free from form, where's the limit? Where's the outer limit of Purusha? Like, there's no form. So you can't say, oh, this is where it starts and this is where it ends. It's got no form. More importantly, it's outside of time and outside of space, right? So it can't be limited by time. It's not temporal in that way. And it can't be limited by space. Sometimes I joke, the only other thing that's not limited by time are long, meandering Monday night Zoom classes, but most things sorry, Isha, most things start and end. This doesn't, sadly. Some things start, and then you know that in 2 hours it will end. So it's limited in time. That's the time when that thing happens. Or some things are limited to space. Like, for instance, Padati, a ritual manual, a particular one might say, okay, go and do a ritual in this cremation ground. Or like Jwalamukhi was saying, she wants to go see her namesake in the Shakta Pita for Jwalamukhi Devi. That's limited to space. You have to go there to that space to access that thing. Some things are limited in time, and often limitation just means where one thing ends and another thing begins. Paricheda, the definition of ananta or infinite is unparicheda, where you can't distinguish where something starts and where another thing begins. So, where one thing ends and another thing begins. So if limitation is formal, where one thing stops and another thing begins, if it's temporal, if it's spatial, then no limitation could apply to Purusha. Therefore, Purusha is infinite. Now we have a problem. We are positing two infinites. Purusha is infinite and Prakriti is infinite. And that's mathematically not okay, because then they're infinite, but they're limited in that they're not each other. So if Purusha is infinite, Prakriti is infinite, that doesn't make sense, because there's one thing that Prakriti is not, Purusha, and there's one thing that Purusha is not, Prakriti. So they're limited by each other, you see? So they can't be both infinite. And therefore, Sankhya posits pluralism, many different souls. It posits dualism and a dualistic realism based on two infinities. This was what we can push back on. But the one thing Sankhya gives us that would be life-changing for many people in consciousness studies is this clear definition of consciousness. It is first-person witnessing subject, not the range of things you can witness as that first-person witnessing subject. Purusha, Prakriti, Viyoga, or Purusha, Prakriti, Vichara. This is a sadhana. I love the way Swami Vivekananda put it. He sometimes waxes lyrical using a Sankhyan model. He says, step back. This stepping back means withdraw your identification from objects and return it to the subject. Step back and see the world as a painting, knowing that nothing affects you. So remember, it affects the body, it affects the mind. If you are not the body and mind, nothing affects you. So step back, see the world as a painting, knowing that nothing affects you, be mad with joy even at evil. That's what Swamiji says. Like, that's a direct quote from Thousand Islands Park, one of the lectures that he gave there in the Inspired Talk. So notice, the way he's framing Prakriti though is important. He's calling it a beautiful picture. In the Vijñāna-Bhairava Tantra, a show that I was asking just now, and I think we can find the verse, and we'll pull it up. I'll take you to the text in just a bit, after we get past this section. In the Vijñāna-Bhairava, there's like this whole sadhana around that, like see the world as a painting. And notice, this will help, this will be easier for someone who knows how to look at paintings. If you're the kind of person who enjoys art, if you go to a museum and you look at art, or you go to a friend's gallery and you watch the painting and you're looking at it and appreciating it, like that, with that same aesthetic appreciation that you bring to a painting without judging it, just experiencing it, like that you can experience the painting, the vichitra, that is this world, this strange painting, this assortment of images that appear all at once almost in front of me, as if I'm standing before a Hieronymus Bosch or something, where there's all sorts of craziness, violence and darkness and hell, but there's also angels, and the whole thing is just batshit insane. It's like so maximal, but therein lies its beauty. Because I can look at that, observe that, experience that, and because I'm not affected by that, I can enjoy that. So here we give the metaphor of the axe murderer and the movie. So if you're Jamie Lee Curtis, you're actually Jamie Lee Curtis, and you're actually being chased by an axe murderer, you won't like it. Probably, I think. I don't know. I'm not to kink shame. So but no, again, it's like if you are Jamie Lee Curtis actually in danger, she might not enjoy that, but she enjoys acting the role of the Scream Queen because she knows even if she's stabbed on stage, she's just going to go back home to her house in Brentwood. Or at least that's where she's like it doesn't really affect her what happens on stage. Therefore, she can with gusto participate in it. She's able to play her role as the Scream Queen, the Leela Natar, in the dance, in the theater, because, and primarily because she feels safe. Even as she's being chased by the axe murderer, on some deep level, she knows she's safe. Do you see? On a deep and primordial level, she never forgets, even if she's method acting. That's why I think method acting can be dangerous when one forgets who they are and starts identifying with the role. But if you can play the role really well, it means you're identifying with it, but not so much as to lose yourself. And so therefore, it's like enjoyable. What's enjoyable about being an actor is you can explore states and emotions and characters without necessarily departing from your own state. That's the beauty of acting. But then what about the viewer, the one who's in the audience watching the Scream Queen run from the axe murderer? They identify, like see, again, it's a matter of seeing and then the object becoming something you can identify with. So when you look at the screen, you see the Scream Queen, you identify with her, and then you think you are her. And when she's running from the axe murderer, she, the actor, is enjoying that, and you, the viewer, are sympathetically entering into the actor's bhava, and you're experiencing the fear also. Bhayanaka, it's called. The Bhayanaka rasa, the feeling of fear that you get from watching a horror movie. And what is this? Like, the news is essentially a horror movie. The world is like a horror movie. But it's fun to watch a horror movie. Only because you know that what's happening on the screen is not happening to you. And even if you're acting, you know that what's happening to the character is not happening to you. That's actually the aesthetic theory of enjoyment, of art. It's that safety, that sense of being transcendent to what you're looking at, which allows you to actually, weirdly enough, engage more with what you're looking at. If you thought that you were that thing, you would flinch away from it out of fear and out of a sense of danger. But if you knew that you weren't at all in danger, you could relax and ease into the thing. Whether it's a painting or a theater production or a song. Isn't that so, like, paradoxical? It's the space, the distance from an artwork that allows for intimacy. So when Swami Vivekananda says, see it all as a beautiful painting, I mean, we pointed to the Vijñāna-Bhairava in that class, because, we have a Vijñāna-Bhairava series, and we already did this verse. I forget what number it was. 50 something maybe. But, 150 something maybe. I don't know, we'll look at the text in a bit. But in that verse, it says to do just that, like what Swamiji is saying. Step back, observe the whole world as a beautiful painting, knowing nothing affects you, enjoy its beauty. So what Sankhya has done is it's given a primordial dualism of Shiva and Shakti in the form of Purusha and Prakriti, and then it's ascribed a sort of, not teleology, there's no purpose for a being that's outside of time, there's no means, there's no ends, but a kind of aesthetics. This is my first point. Sankhya offers an aesthetic model of liberation. And we know this because in some of the earlier texts, like Sankhya, Karakas, and whatnot, attributed to Kapila, you get actually a few metaphors. One is of a husband and wife. So the husband is lame, the wife is blind. This is misleading because it makes you think that Prakriti, the wife, is conscious. She's not, hence she's called blind. Prakriti is blind because she doesn't see. She's not aware. And therefore, if she's not aware, she won't have a will. So desire, will, they're presupposed by awareness. If you're not aware, if you're just a rock, what will be your desire? What will be your will? What do you want? Nothing. You aren't anything. If you aren't, then you won't want. And that's what Prakriti is. So she's a blind woman. They say woman because Prakriti is gendered. It's a grammatical gender, not to be taken too seriously, like in any literal sense. So Prakriti is a woman, and she's blind. And Purusha is a man, and he's lame. It's interesting. He can't walk, he can't move. Because notice, Prakriti-aiva cha karmani kriyanani sarvasha. All the dynamism of expansion and contraction is in the body, is in the mind. It's the Prakriti that's moving. The Purusha is the witness or the space in which that movement occurs. Now the Shiva Shakti model of Kali standing on Shiva becomes clearer. Like that's pointing to a primordial Sankhyan orientation where Shiva is the space that's inert, hence he's a corpse. Corpse meaning there's no life, no movement. Kali is the life, the Prakriti that dances. And now the dancing also makes sense because in that metaphor, they're husband and wife. Purusha and Prakriti are husband and wife. Purusha is a lame man and Prakriti is a blind woman in this kind of heteronormative way. They are a good team. They go together. One without the other would be meaningless. Can you imagine a seer with nothing to see? And what's worse, something to see without a seer? The two have to be with each other. So like they're married in this kind of poetic way. So notice like then Prakriti is not a problem anymore. It's only a problem if you don't know what you're looking at. If you don't recognize yourself as Purusha, you lose yourself in your spouse, that relationship will suck. Arguably, from like just dating point of view, right? Like it's probably better that you're established in your own self and that your partner is established in themselves, and then the two of you share what you are, as opposed to trying to like take refuge in the personality and being of the other and losing yourself in the process. Then you even become less attractive to the partner, because who are they with? And so therefore, like establishing your own identity, stepping back, asserting your own inviolable sense of self is the best way to be intimate with nature, with your spouse. So if you look at Prakriti and know that I'm not Prakriti, weirdly, paradoxically, it's a kind of aesthetical, poetical approach to nature. Then I can just see it as a painting and enjoy its beauty. Just like I would watch a mala and a corpse float down the Ganga. Just like I would watch Jamie Lee Curtis running from the axe murderer on screen. Now, this space between the first person witnessing and the thing witnessed, if I can cultivate it, Abhinavagupta calls this Shanta Rasa, the flavor of peace, quiescence, spaciousness. It's essentially that Sada Shiva flavor of like, I'm always Shiva. The word Sada means always. So Sada Shiva means always blessed, always Shiva. And of course, when you think of Shiva, the connotation is of the supreme yogi, meditating, deeply absorbed and unbothered. That's the thing about Shiva. He's absolutely not indifferent in a cold way, but indifferent in this wonderfully like self-asserting free way. He's free, so free that he doesn't take too seriously what occurs. And so his eyes are closed, he's in meditation. That's the Sada Shiva. But notice, if Sada Shiva is really Sada, then he is Shiva whether or not his eyes are open or closed. So whether or not he's experiencing deep sleep or dream, whatever kind of dream it might be, at no point does he depart from his Shiva nature. So therefore, he's always quiescent, always peaceful. We call this Shanta, peace. Rasa, flavor. Shanta Rasa. Now let's get a deeper aesthetic theory from this. Without Shanta Rasa, you won't be able to appreciate art. Essentially, what art is the ability to be present with something, whether it's a piece of music, or whether it's poetry, or whether it's a painting, or whether it's a theater production, and be fully present for it without ever forgetting that you're having an art experience, like we just described. If you can do that, this Shanta Rasa then turns every other rasa into something aesthetic. So whereas anger would just be anger, just straight up krodha, which usually is not fun, and biologically even it's bad for you, right? Like the cortisol levels and whatnot, like it's like biologically harmful and psychologically harmful to be angry. But then anger in an artistic context, when you like see how Ram Prasad rails at his divine mother, in that context is no longer krodha. It's not anger. It's not raw base anger anymore. It's now Raudra Rasa. It's got a new name. It's made into an aesthetic thing of beauty, Raudra Rasa. If you're sad, but then you find a way to like bring music into it, like Sonu was saying, and then you make that sadness into a kind of aesthetic flavor, where your grief is no longer a feeling of loss, but a deep affirmation of how much you loved that person or love that person. And when your grief is no longer a feeling of separation, but a feeling of presence. Sometimes people feel closer to you after they leave you or after they're dead. That feeling, that grief, then goes into Karuna Rasa. It's a different feeling than just straight up Glani. Glani is a good Sanskrit word for depression. Glani is when you're like sad, or Shobha. Shobha means sadness. So you become Akshobha, Aglani, when even that grief can turn into something of beauty. But that's only possible with Shantarasa. So if you can sit with your emotion and breathe into it and recognize that you are something other than it, it transforms. That Shantarasa seems to make what would otherwise be a raw, brute, immediate experience into an aesthetic, transcendental, refined experience. Now, this is where like it becomes more practical. That experience, that rasa, points to something beyond itself. And it's pointing to the space in which it's experienced. So notice, every rasa can only be tasted if you are the taster. There must be a witness for something to be witnessed. Therefore, haven't you noticed? Anything that you witness is indirectly pointing out the witness. Every object is affirming the subject. Therefore, they work together, the blind woman and the lame man. Together, they are a good force. One can see and the other can move. And the movement, the dynamism of nature is like a mirror almost, pointing back to your Purushatva, which you might not have been able to articulate without something to bounce off of. How beautiful, isn't it? Now, coming back to the material reductionist model and why we're rejecting it, the whole issue here is the inability of the epistemological, neurological, and psychological world to define consciousness and to conflate consciousness with its objects. Once you do that, you clear up the discussion a lot, and then you get what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. You can show in Phineas Gage and various other experiments how changing the brain will change dreams, emotions, memories, thoughts. But all you've shown is that physical matter affects subtle matter. Everybody knows that. If you think a certain thought, you might salivate. If I think of biting a lemon, my tongue might start to water, because a mental thought can influence a physical thought. And then a physical thought can a physical thing can influence a mental thing. And you know what? Like, for a long time in the Western world, it was just not clear that that's true, because the Cartesian duality insisted upon mind and body being different. But if you recognize that they're just objects, mind and body being different kinds of objects, some subtle, some gross, then it makes sense how they can have causality. An object can affect a object. Like the mind, the subtle object, can affect the brain, the physical object, and the brain, vice versa, as we've experimentally proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, can cause the objects. You don't even need to have correlation here. It can be causation. You can assert, as philosophically naive as it might be, causation, and still you wouldn't have it. You wouldn't understand what consciousness is. And that's where I think a lot of scientific materialism goes wrong. So if you know consciousness is not the thoughts, then you will not say the brain produces consciousness, which leads to the hard problem of consciousness. What David Chalmers coins the hard problem of consciousness. Okay. In response to this, though, you guys, the scientific community can offer up what is called promissory materialism. So they can say, well, we just don't know what the link is yet. Give us some time. With better instruments, with better technology, like all the mysteries of the yesteryear, we'll solve it. We'll show you how the brain generates consciousness. This is where Thomas Nagel's work becomes important. In that paper, What's It Like to Be a Bat? He plays on a very traditional Indian logic scheme, which is category error. If the objects of the world are one thing, and if the subject to whom the objects appear is another, then to study the objects in hope of learning something about the subject is a category error. Science is the study of objects. It can observe and gather data and come to conclusions about what was observed and what was tracked. Can you do that with consciousness? Consciousness is the observer, the data collector. How can you have data on the data collector? How can you observe the observer? Therefore, if you think consciousness can be studied through science, which is the study of objects, you still think consciousness is an object. But if you know that consciousness is a subject distinct from objects, science won't help you there, insofar as science is the externally oriented, objective study of the objective world, in which consciousness has no place. How's that? So therefore, scientific materialism doesn't work for that reason, because it has the hard problem of consciousness, and no promissory materialism will be able to solve for it. As Thomas Nagel shows in that paper, What's It Like to Be a Bat? It's a category error. To expect something that's in the objective domain to reveal knowledge about something in the subjective domain. But there's one other problem, and it's this third problem that I'm going to offer with regards to physical materialism or reductionism is this. Have you ever once in your life, and this is a phenomenological argument, so I'm appealing to your experience, have you ever once in your life observed or experienced just matter outside of consciousness? Can you ever at any point verify the objective independent existence of matter? You'll very soon see that you cannot. Because the moment you prove it, the moment you verify it, the moment you point to the objective independent nature of matter outside of consciousness, it is already a fact of your conscious experience. You're already aware of it. And therefore, at no point can you step outside of your awareness to experience anything outside of it. Everything that is experienced, measured, observed, documented, it's all within awareness. All the so-called objective scientific experiments happen within awareness, which explains thoroughly why there's such complication in the quantum mechanics world now with the Copenhagen inference and post that whole thing. It's like, are we in an observed universe or a participatory universe? Why is it that the more I observe something, the more I see particle wave diffraction? That's so weird that the world is not there to be studied objectively. It's rather within me, constantly changing based on how I perceive it. So now notice, if I cannot show the world as an objective independent entity outside of consciousness, I'm left with a startling conclusion. To posit such a world would be manifestly unscientific, because I'm positing the existence of something outside awareness that I will never verify, cannot verify by definition. Why would you do that? Why would you say this thing exists, which you've never seen and cannot see? Rather, wouldn't it be better and more natural to just take a phenomenological approach and say, anytime I've noticed something, I've noticed it from within consciousness. People get scared here. They're like, oh my God, are you saying it's solipsism? No, not at all. Because there are things I don't see that are still within consciousness. There are things that I don't know that are still within consciousness. The seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown, the soon to be known and the never to be known, the soon to be seen, the never to be seen, all of that exists in consciousness. Either as that actual experience or that potential experience later. But at no point whether actual or potential, is an experience outside of consciousness. What is the world but an experience? What is the body but an experience? What is the mind but an experience? If there is a flow of experiences at all, it cannot be outside. It must be inside. So the phenomenological response to the hard problem matter, sometimes also called the problem of subjective idealism, Bishop Berkeley and whatnot in the Western tradition, you can't prove, first of all, that other people exist, but it's okay, we'll leave that for now, but you can't prove that the world exists separately from me. So if other people exist and if the world exists, it exists within me. But what's me now? Is it within the body that this world exists? No. There are different bodies. Look at Nikila. Bhairavi Nikila's Devi's body's there. My body's here. One's in like North California, the other's in South California. In Nikila's body is not in Nisha's body. That would be weird. Clearly you can point to the two bodies and say they're different. Mind also. Nikila is not in my mind. She can think thoughts that I won't know. Think of a number between 1 to 100. Unless I had a turban on and a mock Indian accent, I was trying to get your money, maybe you can try to. But most of the time, she can think things that I don't know. And therefore, I can't say that she's in my mind. If she was, I would know all of her thoughts, but I don't. And if she was in my body, I would feel all of her sensations, but I don't. So it's not that Nikila's body is in Nisha's body, nor is Nikila's mind in Nisha's mind. That's proper solipsism. This is different. It's Nisha's body and Nikila's body, which both exist. It's Nisha's mind and Roy's mind and all of that. And that all exists within me. But that me is now distinguished from the little me, the body and mind that I previously thought I was, through my obsession with objects and through my inability to distinguish Atma and Anatma, Nirvikara and Savikara, Drik and Drisha, self and not self, unchanging and changing, and more importantly, seer and seen. How cool. So I hope by now, at this point in the discussion, we have thoroughly debunked material reductionism, which is premised upon the idea that there's an objective, independent world that can be observed, which is premised upon the idea that there's a body which generates a brain, which then generates consciousness, which is an emergent property. I have never once experienced matter, and therefore I can never say matter is the cause of consciousness. But I have experienced consciousness. I'm a conscious being talking about a brain. I don't feel myself to be a brain generating consciousness. So it makes way more sense to say I am consciousness, and it makes way more sense to say the world is internal to that consciousness. So we've improved upon Sankhya a little bit, and hopefully we've battered the material reductionist position. So no longer is it believable. But look at what the consequence is. If you buy into material reductionism, you will always be seeking outside of yourself for joy, because materials are out there. And you'll always be seeking materials for joy. You'll always think joy is that which happens in the body and mind, and therefore it's conditional. Joy is conditioned upon the body being a certain way, chemically, physically, whatever, and the mind being a certain way, psychologically. And because the body and mind are always changing, when you seek that kind of joy in the body and mind, and you want that to be the same, you'll be disappointed. And more importantly, the reason you're disappointed is because materials aren't anything. So the more you collect, you don't get the sense that you're collecting anything. You get a hopeless sort of materialism in the end, a nihilism. Like, it leads into a sense of meaninglessness, because it was meaningless. Like, you were operating, the whole thing was operating off of a false paradigm of matter being prior to consciousness and the world being independent, objective. And therefore you lived like that, and you objectified everything. You objectified yourself, you objectified the world, and you never checked in and felt into what it means to be you right now prior to any story you could have about it. So hedonism, materialism, premised on scientific reductionism, doesn't lead to that much satisfaction. So therefore we're not proposing that. We're not proposing that the world is real on this basis, and nor are we proposing hedonism or materialism as like rewarding or fulfilling. But then again, we're not rejecting it either. We're not, like, as you'll soon see, there's value to this also. Now I'm going to contrast this to the other position, which is the subjective idealist position. But before I do that, again, just for fun, thoughts, comments, concerns, any pushback, any questions, any clarifications? Yes or no? This is important. For this sadhana to work, you can't just passively listen to me. You can. It'll still be fun. I think this is entertaining. But for it to work, you must see what is being pointed out. So I want to check with you now and see, like, is this clear? Like, do you feel yourself to be separate from the body and mind? And again, this can be taken into a sadhana. You can sit there in meditation and do this, but you don't have to. You can do it right now. As we're talking, as you're thinking about this stuff, just notice that it's true. Notice, oh my God, the world is an object. Body is an object. Mind is an object. I am not these things. So what's my relationship to these things? Just to witness it. And isn't it beautiful? Especially so now that I know I'm safe. Step back, see the world as a painting, knowing nothing affects you. Be mad with joy, even at evil. Yes, Kalidasi. Oh, I saw Sonu. Yeah, Kalidasi also.
Yeah, really quick. It's so true. Once you start to remove yourself from what you see and just be the witness, it changes how you view things. Because right now, if this had presented itself 6 months ago, which it did, I was scared. I was like upset. I was crying. I'm like, okay, well, this is happening again now, so it must be happening for a reason. But I don't feel affected by it. I'm not frightened. I
Hmm.
know I'll be fine. Things will happen no matter what I think I'm going to do to take care of it. I don't have to manipulate anything. I can just allow it to transpire, just allow things to unfold and just
Yep.
witness it. And it changes really a lot of anxiety and things that you feel inside. So it does work when you really start to think about these things at a deeper level and start to embody them more. And it does work. So thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. And notice it's like you don't need to embody it or think about it. It is already the case, right? It's like that's the thing. It's like we don't need to. This is the beauty. We don't need to remove ourselves. We have to recognize that we're already removed. So notice it's a noticing thing, a pratyabhigya, a recognition. But the problem still in Sankhya, which we haven't resolved, is the two infinities. There cannot be Prakriti as an infinite separate from Purusha, and we just established that there's nothing outside of Purusha. So the infinitude of Prakriti is contained within Purusha, or rather is an expression of Purusha, and there's only one Purusha. So now Sankhya is melting into a deeper idea, an idea that we get in Kevala Advaita and in Trika non-duality too, which is the idea of one unitary consciousness. In Advaita Vedanta, it's called Brahman. Here we're going to call it Shiva, though we essentially more or less mean the same thing, except the word Shiva implies one extra thing that Brahman does not have, and that is Shakti, and we'll come to that in just a bit. But Sonu, do you have something? You have a question or?
Yeah, I had a question where I asked, like, kind of your statement on how, like, I don't know how to word it. I forgot exactly. I know what you said, but I just don't know how to like reword it to
Very
you.
good. This is the
But it was
sadhana, right? As you try to reword it, articulate it in your own words, that's the tarka. Tarko yoganga uttama. It's the supreme thing. Like this is the practice. So try.
like when you were basically saying, like that there is like this experience that we're having of reality is like not something like objective. We're not having an objective. It's a subjective experience. But isn't the subjective experience an objective one?
No, it's yeah, yeah. We're experiencing it as an object, but not as an object separate and independent and outside of the subject. Right? There's
Right.
objectivity within the subject, but now you're right, because if I say the subject has become the object, I have the category error, right? I have this problem of like, wait, I'm now objectifying the subject. You said that nothing's outside the subject, so everything I see must be the subject, but I'm seeing it. That makes it the object, right? Like this is the exactly right on the money here, Sonu, because this is the problem. And Advaita Vedanta will solve this problem by saying, when have you ever seen an object? Actually, there's nothing here. It's an illusion. If you're seeing, it's because you're superimposing. There's nothing to see. You alone came and filled the lacuna with all these things to see, and it's an error for you to do so. So what Shankara is going to say is that there's a rope, a real rope, which is just a subject. The object is called the snake. If I perceive the snake, is the snake within the rope? Is the rope the snake, Sonu? In one sense,
I
no,
don't know
right?
anymore.
Good. No, in one sense, no. In one sense, seeing a snake is not seeing a rope. So here, Shankara will say this
Yeah.
is called adhyasa, or he'll call it avarana. I can't see the rope as long as I'm seeing the snake. As long as I insist that there's a snake there, I will not or cannot see the rope. So I have to remove the experience of the snake. This is called, technically it's called baddha. Baddha means sublation. Unless I sublate the experience of the snake, the experience of the rope won't shine through. And that rope is what's real. The snake is my projection. So Shankara goes so far as to say God, the material universe, and the self, as in the distinct individual jiva, all these are like seeing a snake when there's really a rope. Notice how easily this can be turned into samadhi or videha, mukti, fetishizing sort of position, because like you're only really in truth when you're not experiencing the world. Anytime you're experiencing the world, that's like seeing a snake and not the rope. When you're not experiencing the world, as in the case of deep sleep or nirvikalpa samadhi, that's when you're most you. And there's one way you can interpret Krishna ji saying, the yogi, what is day to the nighttime is day to the yogi, and daytime is nighttime to the like something like it's like a thing like what is nighttime, the clear light of consciousness. I'm most conscious when I'm in deep sleep, and therefore you have texts like the Jivan Mukti Viveka that fetishize nirvikalpa samadhi. So now the goal is just to stay in nirvikalpa samadhi.
Yam 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 yakshatu pam dashad shivatitam bhumikam payamanam tam sam samhara motam siramukadachata shekaram chanda bhimam dam dham dham dhirgakayam brakatanamakam jodvaro bam karadam pam 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 patmana papanasham pranamata sachatam bhairavam kshetrapalam ram 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 raktavarna katit katitatanu tikshna dhamta karalam Gham gham ghosha ghosham gaga gaga gaditam kharjaram kauranadam kam kandapasham draka draka drakatam janditam kamadhaham tam tivyadeham pranamata satatam bhairavam kshetrapalam lam badantam lalalitam dirgajiva karalam dhum raharana sprata vikatamukham bhaskaram bhimarupam rum ruttamalam ravimaniyatam dhamranetam karanam nam bhusham paranamata satatam bhairavam chetpalam vam bhayuvegam natajana sadayam brahmasaram parantam kam katkahastam tribhuvanalalayam bhaskaram bhimarupam cham chalitva chala chalitam Chalita chalitam bhumi chakram mam mayirupam pranamata satatam bhairavam kshetrapalam.
Him to Bhairava, so Kavacham. So Bhairavam Kshetrapalam. It's a beautiful phrase. And it's like Kshetrapala, the protector of the field. But look at Gita. Bhagavad Gita gives a wholly different interpretation of the field. Kshetra is the field of awareness. And there's the Kshetragya, the knower, and there's the Kshetra, the field, the gochara of objects, subtle and physical. So I, the Kshetragya, am experiencing the Kshetra. But the Kshetragyas, the Purushas, and the Kshetra, the Prakriti, are one and the same. So Bhairava is the Kshetrapala, the one who protects. What does it mean to protect? To enclose. If you want to protect cows, you enclose them in a pasture. So the world is protected because it's enclosed. Isn't that a great idea? To protect the world is to include the world as part of you. That's the only way you can protect the world, by enclosing it. So the whole world is within consciousness. Therefore, Bhairava is called Kshetrapala. He's also called Bhairava because he emanates. He's Bha, light. And the whole world is nothing but a shining forth in the light of awareness. So he's Bha, Bhairava. And he's sound. The world is light and sound. It's both image and words, concepts and direct experiences. So Bhairava is the Bha, the light, and the Rava, the roar of this apocalyptic world. And more importantly, Bha, Ra, Va, Bharanath, Vamanath, Ravanath, Bhairava, esoterically, the etymology here is one who holds Bharanath. The whole world is held in consciousness. Kali is dancing on Shiva. Ravanath, Shiva ultimately is the void in which everything dissolves. So Bhairava destroys. And Bhairava creates Vamanath, and here he vomits. He like just vomits the world into existence. Vamanath. It's word vomit. This whole world is nothing but word vomit of a chatty Bhairava who's had maybe too much to smoke or too much to drink or something, and has become chatty because of it. The bee buzzes when it's intoxicated on honey. While it's sipping the honey, it's quiet. According to Shramkrishna, after it sips the honey, it gets intoxicated and then it buzzes. So Bhairava is Shiva who's so intoxicated that he's just Bharanathing and Ravanathing and Vamanathing, holding, devouring, spitting, holding, devouring, spitting. That dynamic process of creation, maintenance, and dissolution, as well as revelation and concealment, is what it means to be Shiva as opposed to Brahman. So, okay, cool. All this is like really like technical, but it's not. It should be direct and phenomenological. Though we're using many Sanskrit words and we're doing all these kinds of etymologies, more or less we're saying the same thing. The world is within you. There's only one being, and that being is called Brahman. But to Sonu's point, is there a world? According to Shankara, no, it's a superimposition. The whole thing is a mistake. The world is a mistake. It's called Maya. Now, Maya here means illusion, or rather, avachya Maya. So anirvachaniya, that's the technical term. Anirvachaniya, meaning you can't say that it is, you can't say that it's not, but it's not. You say that it is when you offer an explanation for the snake. What is the rope, if not just the rope? But why do I see it as a snake? Is it the rope's fault? Did the rope project the snake? Well, cannot be. Brahman doesn't project. So Brahman can't be causing the snake. I caused the snake. But wait, am I something other than the rope? Am I other than Brahman? Hopefully the metaphor isn't like, it's not getting confusing. The metaphor here is the rope is Brahman consciousness and the world is the snake.
Yes.
If I'm experiencing the snake, then I'm not seeing the rope. And why? Why did I experience the snake? God, individual souls, like the world, like why did I experience that? Because of Maya, my ignorance. So avidya, not knowing that there's a rope, causes me to see the snake. The rope did not create the snake. So Brahman does not project. Brahman does not conceal. Maya is the projection and concealment, which I alone project and use to conceal the true nature of reality. So therefore, if that's the case, Maya doesn't exist. Ultimately, Maya provisionally exists to explain why I'm seeing the snake when really there's a rope, but absolutely there's only a rope. And so Maya and Shakti don't feature in Kevaladvaita. In Shankara's non-duality, Brahman is a singular homogeneous consciousness, which I am, and it's not even necessarily self-aware. It cannot be an object to itself for reasons that Sonuma has already pointed out. So if Brahman cannot be an object to itself, then the only real truth state is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. As you'll see in Jivan Mukti Viveka, they fetishize it. The longer you can stay in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the better a knower of Brahman you are. That's literally the language they use. Brahma vid Varayan, Brahma vid Varishta. The Brahma vid Varishta in this text, 15th century Jivan Mukti Viveka, that Brahma vid Varishta is the best knower of Brahman. Why? According to the text, because that person stays in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. No karma can push them out of that state. No compassion will force them to take a human birth. The drop is in the ocean. What will they do now? Just be the ocean, I guess. And what kind of ocean? Not even a dynamic, expressive, playful ocean. Just is. So Shankara then points to this reality, Brahman being alone real. Therefore, we call it Kevala Advaita, non-duality only. The world of objects is rejected as unreal. So according to someone like Gaudapada is the guru of Shankara, he would say something like this: if you see it, drishyam, it's mithya. To see something is to prove it doesn't exist. Because to see something is to objectify it, and only the subject exists, and so the object doesn't exist except by ignorance, except by superimposition. So if you're seeing the world, you're not. You're wrong. And so then what? Okay, leave it alone then. Stop going to the mirage expecting to find an oasis. The world does not exist, so don't engage with it. Don't enter into relationships, don't fight on the battlefield. Like in one sense, monasticism or asceticism is the result of seeing the world as illusory. So before, maybe you were hedonistic. You thought the world was real and you plunge into the world in order to find some kind of fulfillment. But now the pendulum maybe swung the other way too hard. It's like, oh my God, the world disappointed me. Honey, maybe it's not the world. Maybe it's me. Maybe I don't understand the world. And so because when I don't understand something and I'm afraid of it, I sometimes call it unreal. It's like escapism. It's like a ascetic attempt to solve the original problem, but Swami Vivekananda calls it dry suicidal advice. He says so many religions are just offering dry suicidal advice. Like it's like trying to kill a mosquito, but you hit the mosquito so hard that the blow in one fell stroke both kills the mosquito and the man. So what's the point of that? Like you wanted to get rid of the mosquito, but you also got rid of the man. Arguably, the person who wants to find fulfillment is now called unreal. Then the whole project is unreal. And then this unreality becomes your focus. Now, all day long, you're talking about neti, it's not this, it's not that. There's a great hypocrisy here because on one level, you feel the reality of the body and mind. And on the other level, because of this philosophy, you're asserting that it's unreal. So how can you assert an experience that feels real as unreal? That will just create the sense of judgment and remorse and resentment. And it's often what happens for a lot of people. They say they have no desires. They say they're free of the world. And yet, deep down inside, they feel that to be hypocritical. And that's like how I said earlier, when they feel that hypocrisy within, they project that outwards and it becomes judgmental. That's a psychological state that we end up in when we fetishize asceticism. And the psychological state that we end up in when we fetishize hedonism is the same. We both feel incomplete. So one is a thesis, one is an antithesis, and it requires now a synthesis, which we're going to come to. Yes, Sonu?
I kind of made a, like, there's a connection I kind of, when you were speaking a little bit on like infinity and like neti, like it's like almost like these two things are absolutes in their own sense. Mm-hmm. And like when I was studying calculus, one of the things that I like, calculus is where you actually see nature, because like you go from this linear, we've been taught linear math, which is not how the world is. The world looks more like non-linear. It looks more, there's a lot more curves in nature. So that results in like math that's like sometimes impossible to really solve, and like sometimes your answer is it does not, the limit does not exist. And like yes. One of the foundational things you learn in calculus is limits, which is literally just seeing where, literally watching this line kind of approach this value but never actually like going to it. But you can say and you can imply that that's what it is, but it's never necessarily reaching that. So it's like in that same sense, like what ends up being most of the time kind of like the answer with a lot of these curves that, you know, when if I'm looking back at my homework, thinking back of my homework, the answer was either 0 or infinity. Mm-hmm. Always. Right, so it was like that nature. So it was like almost like there's a connection between 0 and infinity in itself.
We invented 0 in India. The word shunya came first in India, mm-hmm. but the Sanskrit root for shunya has the connotation of infinite. That's the interesting thing. Mm-hmm. Even shunyavada, the doctrine of nihilism or void, it's a positive something. That void is maximally potent. In the word shunya, like literally the etymology of the word shunya, in the Panini Ashtadhyayi, like one of the dhatus, the dhatu shunya, it also means this purnata. So yes, there's a link, right, between infinity and zero. And I don't know any mathematics, sadly, but I've read some papers from like the philosophy of mathematics side by mathematicians whose proofs I will never be able to verify, so I don't know mathematics. But Gödel, as far as I know, the way Gödel empties axioms of truth value is by using Cantor's theory of like set theory and infinite. So like the fact that there can be bigger and smaller infinities is absurd. And infinity is an unlimited thing. So how can you have bigger or smaller infinities? And Cantor has a proof for that. He can show that there are different sized infinities using set theory. But that's what Gödel builds off of in the 1930s incompleteness theorem to prove that math is kind of fucked. Why is it fucked? Because of this problem with the infinities, which is the same problem that
if you go into any math department in a college and you go past the calculus, which the calculus already kind of implies a lot of like something I was even able to connect from like a beginner's calculus, like Calc 1, right? You go into a math, it's like someone studying that with their degree or like even graduate level, they're like some of the most like esoteric people you'll ever meet. Like they're doing stuff that like they're using symbols I've never seen. So true. That's what they go to.
But and this is very important, like there's a way to do that and not get any spiritual value from it, and there's a way to do that and have that be a sadhana. There's a difference though between someone who's just doing math, and you guys, the answer is in the Dvanya Loka, like I referenced earlier, and I'll come to it in just a bit. This is like a really subtle idea, but starting with the ones and zeros, the binaries of this universe, like notice Sri Ramakrishna plays on that. He says if you have the one, and the one here is Turiya, not the fourth, but the one in which Waker and Waker's world, Dreamer and Dreamer's world, like the one, right? If you have that one, which you can call God or the self or consciousness, we just use the same word Shiva, which means the self, which means consciousness, which means God. If you have the one, every zero that you add after the one will only increase the value of that figure. So if I have 1 and then I add a 0, I have 10. And if I add another 0, I have 100. And if I add another 0, I have 1,000. If I add another 0, I have 10,000. I can't count beyond that. And neither could Lao Tzu, apparently, because in the Tao Te Ching, the maximal infinitude of nature is just called 10,000 things. So like that's as many things as I'm bothered to count. But notice it's ad infinitum. I can just keep adding zeros. But that increases the value. As long as I have the one, the more zeros I add, the more value there is. So notice, isn't there value in sitting and being in samadhi only? That's 1. Isn't there value in opening your eyes and then experiencing the bliss of a kirtan? That's another 0. Isn't there value in going to a rave and jumping around and having a great time there with your friends? And that's another 0. And isn't it wonderful to like fight the good fight in the Kurukshetra battlefield? That's another 0. It's like every 0 you add after the 1 is really just a commentary on Shantarasa, the ability to be in the 1, to stay established in that stateless state in which all states arise and dissolve. That gives those states extra meaning. So the more states that I can have upon recognizing that I am the stateless like witness, the better it is to, like for me actually, as a witness, the bigger the value. But Sri Ramakrishna would say if you don't have the 1, in other words, if you don't have Shanta Rasa, then it won't be Raudri Bhav, it won't be Rasa, it would just be anger. It won't be Shringari, the erotic, it'll just be lost. And that's fine, it's just like not as deep and meaningful as it can be. With the 1, everything makes sense. Without the 1, it's all just zeros. And no matter how many zeros I stack, it's just going to be 0. And that's what the life of a materialist, a hedonist, or even an ascetic might look like. Meaningless after a while because they're just stacking zeros, having not established themselves in the 1. And if they are really established in the 1, then why would they be afraid of 0? The more zeros they have after the 1, the better it is. So like, why would they be fetishizing samadhi when they can open their eyes and realize that which was discovered in samadhi is also present now in this particular cognition? So we oppose the Gaurapada Drishyam Mithya kind of idea. Drishyatva, Mithyatva. If I can see it, it's illusory. And by the way, to prove illusion, they will depend on change. They'll say, because it's changing, it's therefore unreal. Guys, that's axiomatic. And okay, I know. There's a way to try to prove that through Nyaya by using Swarupa Lakshana and Tatastha Lakshana. There's like a way, right? There's like a very hair-splitting Nyaya way to say that like hot water, the heat is not intrinsic to the water. It's not a Swarupa Lakshana of water to be hot. So the fact that heat is a transitive property that comes into the water when the water's on the stove and that it leaves the water when the water's off the stove, that shows you that heat is not a Swarupa Lakshana of water. The same is true of the body. The body exists and then it doesn't exist anymore. So existence is a transitive property in the body. It therefore cannot be the Swarupa Lakshana of the body. It's a Tatastha Lakshana. So therefore, a body doesn't exist. Stuff like that, right? Like weird mathematical, logical arguments, very well actually type arguments to prove that unreality equals illusion. But it doesn't have to be that way. Just because something is changing doesn't necessarily make that thing unreal. And more importantly, just because something is changing, does it make it not valuable? You could say, oh, we're not saying it's unreal, we're just saying it's not worth pursuing. Why? If something changes, it's also novel. Like if every time it's different, that very fact that it's changing is its value. Like, you can't say just because it's changing, it's unreal, and nor is it wise to say because it's changing, it's not valuable. It's only true if I want something eternal, but maybe I don't. Who wants the same thing all the time? Even if you have a favorite food, you'll probably go to different restaurants. If you have a favorite movie, you'll probably still watch other movies. You know, like, or you'll watch your favorite movie and in different settings with different people. You always want novelty. And the universe is nothing if not novel. Every single moment is new because of change. And therefore change is not to be rejected as proving illusion or proving lack of value. It's rather to be accepted as a real experience and really valuable, actually, for the sake of novelty. Do you see? So instead of drishyatva mityatva, seeing is disproving, instead of neti neti, you can apply the opposite kaula approach of iti iti. Iti iti means this, and this too. All of this is Shiva. Why? Because it doesn't appear outside of Shiva as an objective independent entity, and as a changing something or other, it's appearing within me, therefore it must be me. So now we introduce, and Advaita Vedanta won't do this, in Kaula Trika we introduce the word vimarsha. In Advaita Vedanta, it's swat prakasha, but it's just prakasha, right? There's no way in which this subject can objectify itself. And no, we're not saying that either. That would be a category error, and by the way, that would lead to infinite regress. If the subject can become an object, then who's the subject of the newly objectified object? Then the witness would have a witness, 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 and through ad infinitum, through infinite regress, we can show non-entity, right? This is anavasta dosha, it's called. In Sanskrit, logical text, nyayika text, this would be a dosha. This would be a logical flaw to say that something has a witness, which has a witness, which has a witness, which has a witness. There must be one witness, primordial witness. Otherwise, you know, it's like trying to kick a ball into a goalpost, but every time you kick, the goalpost moves away. So if you're looking for the witness and every witness has a witness, you'll never find that witness. That can't be because I'm the witness. There must be a witness. Like, anavasta dosha doesn't work here because I am witnessing this. I am the one engaged in this overly mathematical left brain prefrontal cortex exercise of like logic and reasoning, you see. So I must be there at least to do this kind of logic. So even if I prove the self doesn't exist through my logic, it is to me the self that was proved. Even if there's infinite regress, I must still be there to experience it. So therefore I am that. My very being is the indubitable response to infinite regress. Okay, so this is all very clear, right? Like this, it shouldn't sound mystical. None of this should sound like, it shouldn't go over your head. Like, this is a clear, direct, and phenomenological claim that I cannot doubt my own existence. To even doubt it would like prove it. I am, at least as the doubter of my existence, and that I amness is the witness. There can only be one. How can there be many? For all the reasons aforementioned. So then we say, it's not that the subject is becoming the object to itself. It's something else. It's called vimarsha. The subject is reflecting itself to itself, all within its own subjectivity. Now we can say, if you see it, you are it. Advaita Vedanta won't like this. They'll be like, dude, you found another way to say the subject is an object. Okay, fine. If we cannot escape the category error, which is damning actually because we used the category error earlier, and now we want to disprove the category error, that would be damning. But what if we never used the category error? What if we didn't need to do the Sankhyan project of neti neti? What if from the very get-go, instead of saying drishyatva mityatva or drigdrisha viveka, we just said, if you see it, you are it. Drishyam shariram. So now what's being challenged here is not, oh, I'm not the world. You know, notice, if I say I'm not the world, I can be consistent by saying I'm not the body and not the mind. They're all objects. But wait, what if there were no objects? Then the opposite teaching is applicable. I am the body, right? I am the mind. But why the body and mind only? That's where we get the Kaula interpretation. And you get it from texts like Virupakcha Panchashaka. It's my favorite version of this teaching because it uses the Taittirīyopanishad 5 sheets with some minor variation. And then it says, why stop there? It doesn't reject that you're the mind and body. In Advaita Vedanta, you say, I'm not the mind, I'm not the body. But dude, that's weird. That's not your experience. Your experience is of the mind and body, and your feeling is that you are this mind and body. Fine, keep that where it is. But notice this, why stop at the body? Why do you stop your notion of self at the limit of sensation? I can only feel up to my fingertips. Okay, so then I'm only that. But no, that's not actually true. Like, I don't feel many parts of my body until I come to Kuleshwari's Hatha Yoga class, and then the next morning I feel my hamstring. It was always there, and I always considered it my body, but I didn't feel it. So just because I'm not sensing something, is it not me? That would be weird to say, because there's so many things in the body that I don't sense, and yet I still say I'm the body. So many things in my mind, like in the subconscious mind, to bring Jung and Freud into this, to bring your mother into this. Like, I'm not aware of that right now. But it's there. It's me. I still identify with my own subconscious, whether or not I'm aware of what's in there. The repository of repressed sexual desires that I then project out as judgments. Like, I don't need to be aware of it to say it's me. But again, it's within awareness. Whether I sense it or not should not limit my sense of being this body and being this mind. If that's true, then just because I'm not feeling what Bhairavi Nikila is feeling right now, it's in a sensory way, doesn't mean I'm not her, because I'm looking at her, I'm experiencing her. So that body and that mind is being experienced, just like this body and this mind, within consciousness. Where then is the line when consciousness ends and matter begins? Where does the self end and the other begin? Nowhere. There's no way you can point to that line where I end and where the world begins. Swami Brahmananda's teaching here is important. Show me the line, he said in English, of demarcation between matter and spirit. There is no matter, it's only spirit. And, importantly, if that's true, you don't need to be in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for it to be true. Right now, with your eyes open, as you look at the world, what are you seeing but yourself? And that's all you have to do. When you see it, affirm that you are it. And how wonderfully opposite solipsism this view is. I'm no longer alone in the universe. I'm all one. The all is I, and the I is all in bliss. So therefore, maximal ethical value comes from this. Obviously I will do to others what I want to have done unto myself, because they are myself. I'm not doing it in the hopes that in the future it will be reciprocated. I'm not entering into a social contract of transaction here where I'll celebrate your birthday if you'll celebrate mine. It's not that. I will water the plant because watering the plant is as natural and as obvious as drinking water myself. If this body needs to be given water, then I'm also the body of the plant that needs to be watered. So I will water the plant and drink water with equal relish, because in both cases, am I not just being selfish? Am I not just giving myself what I want, whether as a plant or as a person or as this person? This and that will vanish when we practice Drishyam Shariram. There's no here and there. Notice this and that, here and there. All of that is internal. So I can't say I am this and not that. I am here and not there. If that and there were also part of this experience called this and here. Does that make sense? This shouldn't be overly mystical, If all this sounds like mystical language to you, well, it is, and it's a mystical experience to which this points, but it's just philosophy. It's just pure, direct reasoning, based on indubitable proof, based on your own experience. Show me the line where matter ends and spirit begins. And I gave a lecture on Swami Vivekananda Jayanti just from a purely materialist point of view, and I argue that the same is true for pure materialism. If I really believe that I am matter, then where does this matter end and the rest of matter begin? Is it not just one ocean of matter? How can I say this wave, which I call my body and my mind, how can I say that matter is now distinct from all the other matter in this ocean of matter, this soup of reality called the universe? Even as a materialist, I can reject everything about the soul and I can reject the mind, as Daniel Dennett does, but I can't reject matter as a materialist. And if I take matter seriously, then again, show me the line where one bit of matter stops and the rest of matter begins. You can't. So even if you are a materialist, you still have to come to non-duality. And even if you are an idealist, you have to come to non-duality, because that which you're rejecting as an ideal in the mind is still there as an experience, and all ideas are all part of this homogeneous reality called the mind. So if you're a mind-only person or if you're a matter-only person, the mind is singular, matter is singular. That's what gives us the third view. Drishyam Shariram. So what's the practice? Really, it's stunning. When the Virupaksha Panchashika, the text in which this teaching is given, the first thing that we learn from that text, and let me just get that verse actually. Might as well. I'm going to cite text. Might as well have the Sanskrit in front of me. Real quick, I'll just show you what I mean. I have a little excerpt from the Virupaksha Panchashika in our Paramarthasara document, because there was a particular verse in the Paramarthasara that I felt like this reference to the Virupaksha Panchashika would have been helpful. Okay, here it is. Let me just show you what the text says. This is a Trika text. Beautiful text, because Lord Shiva comes in the form of a demon, Virupaksha, and the demon is teaching Indra. So unlike most tantras, this is considered a primary source by the way, but unlike most tantras where Shiva is teaching Parvati, it's now Shiva's avatara. And remind me to say something about Hanuman later as one of Shiva's avatars. But it's Shiva's avatara, called Virupaksha, the odd-eyed one, that is teaching Indra, a deva. So here's what it says. The Virupaksha Panchashika, the 15 chapters of the odd-eyed one. Namo Vishvashariraya Vishvaikatmya Vabhasine Nitya Pratya Vamarshaya Shambhave Vishvasiddhaye. Directly refuting the Buddhist here with this idea of Nitya. Salutations to Shiva. But who is Shiva? Vishvasharira. That reality embodied as the universe. So Shiva is consciousness for whom the world is but expression, extension, I don't know. The word extension is weird. There's too much baggage philosophically. For whom the world is non-different. I'll put it that way. Salutations to Shiva, who is the world, for whom the world is non-different. He performs the magic of the world, avabhasine. So if the magic is unreal, the magician is. And how can you distinguish the poem from the poet? How can you distinguish the magic from the magician? So Lord Shiva is Maya now. He's the one who performs the magic of the world. He's the Avarana Shakti and the Vikshepa Shakti. or rather, Vikshepa Shakti and Avara Shakti, projecting and diversifying power as well as the concealing power. It's his own power and it's his own magic. He is that one who is embodied as the universe. He's eternally self-aware. Notice, you're never not aware. And you're always aware of yourself. By virtue of your awareness, you are self-aware. So he's Vamarshaya, or Marsha, Mrisha, to be in touch. He's always touching himself. Because when are you out of touch? When have you never been aware? Probably you're aware of that also. So Shiva is always aware and always self-aware, eternally. So he's Nitya. This is an attack on the Buddhist who try to prove Anitya. No, there's one thing that's eternal, and that's the one to whom the concept Anitya is being argued, and in which the concept of Anitya is being experienced. So Shiva is the Nitya, the eternal awareness, who is always self-aware, who is the non-dual essence of the universe, I put it here. Vishvaikatmya is the self of the universe, and shines as everything. That's Shambhu. Shambhave. Salutations to Shiva, the Vishva Siddha, the one who performs the magic of the world, who is always in touch with himself, who is always self-aware, Nitya Pratya Vamarsha, who is my very own self, which shines as everything. Salutations to that God for whom the world is not different, or rather that God who is embodied as the world. When you want to speak of Shiva in this way, you call him Kuleshvara. Kula means body, or it means family, and the world is nothing but a family. The whole thing is a Kula, a body, and Lord Shiva is the Kulapati, the lord of that family. More importantly, he's Kuleshvara. He's the one who is that body. So now you get Kaula. The whole Kaula worldview rests upon this insight, that if it exists within me. Therefore, it is me. And what am I? Pure non-dual consciousness. Okay, then this is where it gets interesting. This is where you get the theory of impurity and purity and why we go beyond all moralizing here. Prishta iti prashna linganumeyana. Actually, no, this verse is not that important. Because he was worthy of being taught the ultimate truth as a result of the descent of grace upon him, Shaktipata theory here, Indra asked this question. We are Indra, of course, and Shiva is about to teach us. And thus the discourse begins in order to initiate the verbal initiation that will answer it. I gave a big talk on Diksha and how this is called Upadesha Diksha, where you don't need a mantra, this is the mantra. And once you hear the mantra, you just have to see that it's true and you're free. This is called Diksha. Diksha is when you remember that you are Shiva and you remember the world is not different from you. Diksha is when, from that point on, you gain this insight, you dispel the ignorance, and what you see from this point on is nothing but yourself. And you react accordingly. Oh dear one, all this from the void state, again about the Buddhist, to the play of the divine, including even that which is heretical. That's how I've translated it. But shunya pada dilavadi dishatvat pindavat siddham. It's all my own body. Vimati padamanga, shariram idam, this world is my own body, including that which is heretical? Like, what is that? Avadi. Heretical would mean like meat or wine or other castes. How can there be a Shudra in a world where there's only one consciousness? What will you make of Brahmins and Shudras and Kshatriyas? Like, there's no difference between the fire in the Brahmana's house and the fire in the Chandala's house. Both are fire and both will burn just the same. If you think the Brahmana in this context is the body and the Chandala a different kind of body, is not the consciousness that shines in and through both bodies the same consciousness? Am I not the Shudra and the Vaishya and the Kshatriya and the Brahmana all at once? Am I not even the meat and the wine? Vamachara, all these things are deified. We pray to the wine. It's Sudha Devi, the goddess of nectar. Why would I pray to the wine as a being if I don't, in this philosophy, recognize that it's conscious? In what sense is this wine conscious? It's conscious because I am conscious, and within me consciousness appears the wine. So, oh dear one, all this from the void, shunya, to the play of the divine, which is this world. So the non-existence and existence, and including those things which you might consider heretical or impure, like wine and like meat and like Shudras. Since it appears in my consciousness, it is verily established as my own body, for I myself am consciousness. This is why an Aghori, for instance, in the modern context, might eat excrement. They're just walking the talk. They're like, wait, why am I afraid of myself? Like, this is excrement. It's other than my body. It was just in my body and now it's outside of my body, and I'm saying because it's outside of my body it's impure. Look, when it was in the body I had no problem with it. The moment it comes out of my body I have a problem with it. That's a problem. Somehow I have this concept that there's something outside my body, but we just disproved that. So if there's nothing outside my body, what excrement? What is excreted? Excreted from what? So then the Aghori might lick the excrement of themselves and others, because there are no others. That's what explains some of these panchamani type sadhanas, where you take the reprehensible, but more often the transgressive and the heretical, and you say, I can't have a problem with it anymore, because it's within me. So one way to practice this is Holy Mother's thing, don't find fault in others. It's like, if I'm noticing something in someone and I'm saying it's there in them and not in me, that's weird. Because even if I don't manifest that quality, the fact that I'm able to see it and experience it means that that's within me. A baby will not see a thief. Lest ye be as little children, yours not the kingdom of heaven. But importantly, what is the opposite of the kingdom of heaven? That temporality where moth and rust corrupts and where thieves break in and steal. Babies know no moth. They know no rust. They know no thief. A baby doesn't see a thief because she doesn't have a concept yet for a thief. If somebody comes into the room and is about to steal a bag of gold, the baby might smile and laugh. Or if somebody comes into the room and tries to give a baby a milk bottle, it might cry. It doesn't yet understand what is being given or what is being taken away. If you give a baby a gun, it might not even know that it's a gun. It might start playing with it, putting it in its mouth and shit like that. It's very scary because America, gun deaths are so common. So, oh my God, too soon maybe for Americans. But notice, it's like the baby doesn't know what a gun is. That's why it shoots itself and others. It doesn't have gun toa. Guna toa, gun toa. Like concept of gun and thief. So in the eyes of a child, it's all the mother. Everything just appears to be its own mother. It can't really distinguish sometimes between the mother and the world. So it just cries to the world as if crying to its mother, because the baby has this wisdom that the world is not other than mother. Okay, cool. So I think we did it, right? Like we proved through metaphysics this idea that the whole world is me. I'm embodied as the world. What have we done? We've proven the world is real. It's not like illusory. It's changing. It's obviously dynamic. Therefore, we say it's Shakti, the dynamic one. It's changing. But that doesn't mean it's unreal. And I can't say it's not valuable, because isn't the self valuable? That's what Advaita Vedanta is all about, the rope. But the rope can project a snake and experiences itself as a snake, and that doesn't change that it's a rope. Thank God for the snake, because at least snakes wriggle and hiss. There's some meaning to it. So if I am the world, then I want to be. So now this is where I think people have a problem. It's like, okay, so far so good. But what we're going to say now, maybe this will be difficult, is this sense. It must be theism. Advaita Vedanta will reject theism. It's monism without theism, non-theistic monism. Brahman is not a being. Brahman is not even self-aware. So much so that we can say to Advaita Vedanta, you guys talk about pots all the time. Maybe you should try smoking some, because at the end of the day, your absolute reality Brahman, I don't even know what Swat Prakasha is, neither do you probably. You don't think that's conscious? Consciousness is not conscious? How is that any different from the Buddhist that you are negating? That's still nihilistic. To say that I am fundamentally that being that's not even self-aware, because according to you, Kevala Advaita, to be self-aware is to have a mind in which consciousness is reflected. All of that we can just reject. I know Kevala Advaita is not just Abhasavad. There's other ways to understand it too. But mostly when people talk about Advaita, Kevala Advaita, they invoke the mind as a reflecting medium in which consciousness is self-aware. If there's no mind, as in the case of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you aren't self-aware. So then what is Nirvikalpa Samadhi but a void state? It's a kind of dry suicidal advice, killing the whole person when really you wanted to get rid of the mosquito. So in response, we say there is at no point awareness without self-awareness. Awareness is always self-aware. So we introduce the concept Vimarsha. Vimarsha just refers to self-reflexivity. Again, this is a quibble. Self-reflexivity is when the object appears to the subject, but that object is not different, so it's a subject appearing to itself. Does that objectify the subject? I don't know, Sonu. Maybe you'll be satisfied with this. We say no. We say the subject has not become an object because I'm not observing it as another. The whole concept of subject and object, that categorical distinction, is from Sankhya. But what if I just never made it? What if I don't need to make that categorical distinction between subject and object to begin with? It's just subject. And then if subject is experiencing subject, we just call that self-reflexivity. Isn't that what self-awareness is? Being and knowing that you are. You are and you know that you are. That knowledge is inherent to awareness. And so we say Prakasha is Shakti, and she's always in sexual union with Bhairava. Why? Because sex is the metaphor for bliss. And when you're self-aware, you're blissful. And of course, I can give some aesthetic theory to this too. Limitless is always blissful. Yo vai bhuma tatsukam. Nalpe sukhamasti. The Chandogya Upanishad tells us the vast is joy, and the limited is not joy. Nalpe sukha. There's no sukha, there's no joy in the limited. And arguably that's why we get bored of raving. I'll never get bored of raving, because at no point am I going to a party expecting to get something other than what I already am. That's why Kalidas Dasi, my response to your message today was like, you do not need anything. It's when we feel like we need something, and then when we come to that thing that we get used by it. We've outsourced our being and our fullness to that thing, and that thing now has power over us. But if I know that I'm full, whether I do something or don't do something will not change my fullness. So I might as well do it or not do it. It doesn't matter actually. And what I'm enjoying ultimately is my own self. So everything is an enjoying of the self. Whether I'm in Nirvikalpa Samadhi or eating chocolate cake, in both cases I'm enjoying myself. So what we get now is a theism, which contrasts quite a bit with Kevala Advaita. In Kevala Advaita, it's being, but that being is not self-aware, it's not a person. This is a person. It's being, it's an absolute nature of reality, but it's self-aware, and that's all you need to be a person. Aren't you a person? You're self-aware. Is your personality dependent on a body? No. After all, which is your body, and distinguish it from all the other bodies? Is your personality affirmed by qualities. Can't you be a person without any qualities? Of course you can. As long as you're self-aware, you're a person. So we say Brahman is Shiva. We deified Brahman. We said Brahman is God. God is consciousness. Pragyānam Brahma. You can get that also in the Upanishad, taittirīyopanishad. Pragyānam Brahma. God is consciousness, and myself, my Atma, my essence nature is that consciousness. So Shiva is consciousness, is me. And what then is the world? Nothing but me. Nothing but Shiva, nothing but consciousness. So then we say consciousness is playing. So now, the next theistic point we make is this. If you are God and you are full, by the definition of God, you're Purnata. If you are God and you are full, then why the world? Is it a means to an end? No. It must be an end in and of itself. So the world can't be for any purpose. If so, God would have karma. If so, God would be incomplete, looking for completion outside of himself, through which the world supplies. Like, that would be theologically improbable. If I am God, and God is consciousness, and a world appears within consciousness, then there's value to the world. It's my very own. Then we say theory of play. Because God is a person, and the world appears within God for its own sake. The only word we can give to something that you do for its own sake, without any desire for outcome or any fear of consequence, is play. And the whole world is God's play. I am that God, playing in all things as all things. So now I'm the actor. I'm no longer the person watching the movie, identifying with the actor. I am the actor, and I am the stage, and I am the props, and I am also the audience, and I also wrote the script. And I can change that script. I have the freedom to change that script just by changing language. Mantra is the power to alter reality, which I must have, for reality itself is my power. It's my projection. So now Maya is no longer seen as an illusion. It's not a projection of diversity and concealment anymore. Maya is no longer a veil. It's a mirror. Do you see what we've done? We've taken Maya, which was previously understood to be a veil, to be a projection of ignorance, and now we're saying it's an expression of power, which creates a mirror in which I am reflected. But not just that, reflected with diversity. The manifold is included in the singular. So the diversity that appears in the mirror does not take away from the mirror's unitary, singular, transcendental nature. But for whatever reason, a mirror full of reflections is just beautiful. Notice now we enter into an aesthetic theory. The world exists, and it must exist as me, for it doesn't exist outside of me. And I, when I become self-aware in meditation, am equally self-aware when my eyes are open and looking at something. At no point am I not meditating if I have this knowledge. If I don't have this knowledge also, it doesn't change the fact that I'm always meditating. Insofar as you say meditation is to be in touch with yourself, to go inward, there's no way I can go outward. See Kaula Marga? How it works? Like the whole world is me, and therefore rituals have a purpose. Like I can do external rituals. I don't have to say, oh, that's worldly, that's external. There's a whole movement in Indian spirituality rejecting rituals as being too gross, too physical. And there's a whole movement that is all about rituals. And we're saying the synthesis of those two views is this. Ritual or no ritual, I am the world. There's nothing outside, nothing inside. So I might as well do rituals. I might as well eat chocolate cake. And because I know I'm Shiva and I don't need fulfillment from the chocolate cake, it then makes sense to eat chocolate cake. That will just be a zero after the one. So that's all you need to know, that I am self. Of course, that's obvious, that's definitional. What is that self? You can inquire, you can do neti-neti if you want, but we don't have to. You just notice it's consciousness, and then you ask, what is the status of the world in relation to that consciousness? It's not an object to be seen, it's within consciousness as consciousness. And now I have no concept of pure, impure, heretical, or holy. Shuddha or ashuddha. So we can say, that which is the lowliest of things, O Ma, you have pervaded entirely, and that which is the most transcendent of things, thou hast transcended completely. Perfect transcendence and perfect immanence. The transcendent immanent Shiva is what we're implying with the word Shiva. It's the same thing as Brahman, except this reality is self-aware, is playful, is endowed with willing, knowing, and doing. That's just an observation. Everything that is, wills and knows and does. Somananda, we had a whole summer on Somananda. Remember 2024? We had a Somananda immersion. You can refer to all of those videos. And there, Somananda, oh my God, he says, even the pot has a will. The riverbank will be a riverbank as long as it wills to be a riverbank. And one day it will dissolve, and that will be a will. It willed to be a riverbank, and it willed to stop being a riverbank. So even insentient objects like pieces of paper, pots, and riverbanks, to Somananda, are invested with willing, knowing, and doing. Shiva knows himself as the pot. And you too, like when you look at the Ayurvedic copper water bottle, because it's within consciousness, you are knowing yourself. And right now, in the form of an Ayurvedic copper water bottle. Is it not endowed with will? At least the will to be. My will to be causes me to experience myself as an Ayurvedic copper water bottle. The fact that I know myself as an Ayurvedic copper water bottle is itself Kriya, action. The action of Shiva is to reflect himself to himself, and it must be his will to do so. So therefore we say, consciousness is an ever-free, unlimited being. I am that being, and it is my play, for no other reason than because it delights me, to experience myself again and again in ever new forms. Nityodita. Nityodita Paramarsha. Touch myself again and again, and it's new every time. How cool is that? It's an aesthetic theory, right? Okay, one more piece here. I'm sorry, it's a lot. I know, like, again, the only other thing besides Brahman that is infinite are these lectures, because I can just go on and on and on. Like, not to hold you hostage or anything. Not that you are. You're free to come and go as you like. But I have another piece now. From this, you can derive one more piece. And it's this. If the world is no longer seen as a bridge, a means to an end, if it's no longer seen as a prison or an illusion, if it is instead seen as my very own self, now it makes sense to engage with it. But what does that look like? It probably looks like just following the flow of your own will, which probably will take you to the Kurukshetra battlefield in your own context. Like, your own life is a Leela that you are playing, but Shiva is playing through you. So then your responsibility becomes to being authentic, and not negating your desires as being unholy, but affirming them as expressions of Lord Shiva. And more importantly, if Maya is a Shakti, then it's your Shakti. So you can, with your language and with your perception, alter to a large extent, actually, and there's a whole conversation of siddhis we can have here, but you can alter to a large extent your experience of the world. Hence, the mantras make sense, the mandalas and the pujas and all of that. They are to affect the world and change the world. For what? For fun, actually. The whole thing is for fun. So you might as well play. Whether that looks like learning pujas to enact your will upon the world, or just showing up for the job that you want, not the job you think you should have, just acknowledging your desire and then allowing it to flow into completion. Whatever that may look like for you, it's just important that you follow that. You authentically express that. Since it's your power that this world appears, and since this world is for no other reason than for delight and for play. So you're just like discovering yourself again and again and again. That's a theory of aesthetics. The Soteriology of our tradition says a fully liberated person is liberated because they see themselves in all things as all things and enjoy themselves in ever new ways in all things as all things. And that's it. You don't need anything post-mortem, and even after the body is gone, will you not continue to enjoy yourself as yourself, maybe as a Gandharva, or I don't know, in some loka, or as the primordial consciousness tasting itself in void state. Whether it's void, whether it's the universe, in both cases you're Shiva. So why then prefer the rave over the satsang? Both are experiences within consciousness. If you're established in consciousness, both will be equally delightful to you, but in different ways. Cool, right? So now, ritually, we apply this in the Panchamanis, in the Panchamakaras. We apply it in the sadhanas that prioritize bliss. I'm going to show you the Vijñāna-Bhairava Tantra now and show you where in this text we get practices like this. So the first one, the most obvious one, I'm sorry, it's like this red and black font. In a moment, I'm going to justify why I like this aesthetic, but I know it's hard to read. Some of you have complained, you're like, I can't print this document out. I can't even read it. The red is too bright against the black. All of these sound like a you problem. So here's what this verse says. Sarvam jagat swadeham va sva ānanda-bhāritam smaret yugapat svamritenaiva parananda-mayo bhavet. And I put here some definitions of the word smara, dhatu. And this is important because it doesn't just mean recollect or remember. It also refers to love, Cupid, the god of love. It refers to sex, to smara, to remember. Is to like have sex in a way. So the metaphor of the world and God is matter and spirit engaged in love play, love sport, krida, blissful love sport. The thing that you do for fun, that is pleasurable and meaningful and beautiful and aesthetically rich, you do for no other reason, like not for procreation even, arguably just for fun. That is the implication of the word smaret, like sex. So Bhairava yoginim, she who is in sexual union with Bhairava, the Yabyum Buddha, for instance. Now, it also means to remember. So the double entendre here is important. This remembering is a kind of sex. Like Shiva and Shakti are in sexual bliss because Shiva is always aware of himself and yet able to experience himself in all these new ways. So remember this. Recall that the whole world, sarvam jagat, is one's own body, swadeham. So just sarvam jagat swadeham. This is the formula. The whole world is my own swadeha, body. Kaula marga, TLDR. All of this is my body. Va, or sva ānanda-bhāritam. Feel that you are filled with bliss. So if you don't want to look at the world and say it's my own body, the or here is important because I could just as well be closing my eyes and experiencing samadhi. Whether my eyes are open, I'm experiencing the world, or whether my eyes are closed and I'm experiencing just consciousness devoid of objects, I'm still full. Sva ānanda-bhāritam. So recall the world recall that the whole world is one's own body, or feel yourself to be full of your own bliss, or recall the whole world or one's own body is filled with the bliss of the self all at once. That's the practice. Yugapat. Yugapat means right now, right here, all at once. Feel yourself to be embodied as the whole world. Then, sva amritenaiva, through the nectar of your own self, sva amrita, your own nectar. Tena means through. So, through the nectar of yourself, eva, through this alone, through the nectar of yourself alone, sa amritenaiva, one becomes pervaded by the para ānanda-mīmāmsa bhavet, the para, the bliss of the goddess para, who is here the transcendent immanent bliss, or the bliss of transcendence. So this whole verse is a preface to a section in the Vijñāna-Bhairava, starting with verse 66. And so this one says, O doe-eyed woman, Mrigakshane, to remind you this is a loving discourse between Shiva and Shakti. Again, this is a primary source, a Tantra primary source. Through performing or enjoying the performance of a trick, and Shivotpadhyaya defines it as a magic trick, juggling, an acrobatic feat. Apparently there's like I don't know, like if I do this, can you see this? It's like me, like, I don't know, like, look, the thumb. Even that is being referenced here. Like apparently like that's supposed to be like one of the tricks or jokes that people were doing at that time, making it seem like their limbs were taken off. So whatever the joke might be, just enjoying that is a sadhana. Like that's it. It seems so mundane. It's like enjoy jokes, be absurd, have fun, go and watch comedies. And anytime you're laughing, anytime you're enjoying a magical performance, in that moment you realize that this whole thing is a joke. The whole world is a joke, and you're the punchline. And more importantly, it's a magic trick, and that doesn't mean it's not valuable. You see, like the whole thing is a reversal on the Advaita Vedanta view that because it's magic, it must be dismissed. Because it's a joke, because it's absurd, it must be dismissed. No, because it's a joke, because it's absurd, because it's magic, it should be appreciated. And through appreciating it, I only appreciate myself. Next one. Stop all the streams of prana shakti from flowing out of the ears. Then there's a rising upward, which feels like ants crawling on the skin. Pipila sparsha velayam. Then through this comes great joy. Paramam sukham, the supreme joy. Notice what this is saying. Whether I'm experiencing the world or whether I'm not, I'm still blissful. These two verses are like a commentary on this va. The va is or. So either I'm inward or I'm outward. In either case, through my own bliss, I experience myself to be pervaded by bliss. This is one practice going outside, one practice going inside, until you realize 66 and 67 show there is no inside or outside. Now this is the controversial one where it's like, oh my god, the Kula Yaga, the sex act, the sacred ritual sex act is here, just one verse. And doesn't even need to be ritualized in the way that Tantra Loka chapter 29 does. Vanhir vishasya madhyetu chitam. This is important. Madhyetu chitam. Sukhamayam kshipet. Throw the mind, kshipet, into the all-pervading bliss. Chittam means mind. Throw that mind in the middle of the all-pervading bliss of Vanhir Visha. Visha means the tip of the penis, allegedly, or the base of the clit or something, like the site of maximum stimulation in the genital. Visha, its connotation is that. Vanhir means fire. So throw the mind, which is pervaded by the bliss, presumably of sexuality, in between them, or in the middle of the fire and the poison. So it's weird. It's like, what's that? Like, fire is the desire and poison arguably is the ejaculation. It's called a poison because it ends the game. So from a male point of view, if one ejaculates, arguably like that's a poison because it's done at that point. So that would be undesirable. But the fire is what starts the act. The poison is what ends the act. So one way of reading this verse is to say, in the middle of the start and end of the act, be fully present. Throw your mind there. And then through holding the breath, either at the end of the inhale or at any other time, kevalam vayu purnam va smara anandena yujyate. One becomes yujya, yoga, is to be joined to the ananda, or through the bliss of sexual recollection, that or through the bliss of remembrance, or through the bliss of sex, one becomes joyful. And there's a pranayama, I don't know, like this is a mystical technique. Hold your breath. Not for the sake of intensifying the orgasm, but because arguably when you hold the breath, prana vicheda, that energy which otherwise is expressing itself as the orgasm, the ejaculation, has a chance to go inward, up the Shushumna Nadi, and express itself on other levels. So like that's one thing. There's a yogic mystical sort of breath practice happening here, or I should say prana practice, prana vicheda, but I'm not going to emphasize that right now. We have Vijñāna-Bhairava, you can read it in so many ways. I'm not going to emphasize the mystical part. I prefer to emphasize the jnana part. And the jnana here is to remember while you're having sex, the bliss that you're experiencing is synonymous with all bliss. You'll be pervaded by that bliss. During union or intercourse, Shakti Sangama. Shakti means one's own consort. Here in the feminine, because typically, it's weird, Shiva is referring to Parvati, he's talking to Parvati, but he's almost as if he's addressing a man here. He's saying, in a heteronormative sense, right? Like the idea is like a male is speaking to another male about that male's Shakti. But it doesn't have to be heteronormative. I think you can take this in another way. You can say Shakti is just a partner, a consort. And Shakti, because it's dynamic, it's power, and it's like you are Shiva, whether male or female or non-binary, like your partner is Shakti. So I'm going to expand the word Shakti beyond just female consort, though it's a grammatically feminine word, to include any consort. So during union, or rather intercourse with one's Shakti, Shakti Sangama, there arises a great energy of excitement. shankshubdha, or agitation. Even this can be called agitation. When one becomes absorbed in that energy, which is said to be the joy of the highest reality, that is the joy of the self. Now I can go into my Brahmananda, Bhajanananda, and Vishayananda piece. Are we still hanging in there? Is this okay? There's just so many pieces, and I want to give the full system, because arguably this is the whole thing. I have nothing left to say, I hope, after this, and still we'll continue talking. But this is a commentary, I think. This Brahma Tattvasya, it's almost, I think, parallel to the Taittirīyopanishad. Anyway, I'm just going to leave that alone just for a moment, just to show you some of the other practices, and I'm going to double back. O goddess, by remembering vividly the joy of a woman, licking, coercion, scratching, biting, even without a partner, one dives into bliss. Shivotpadhyaya defines the joy of a woman. He uses these erotic aesthetic terms where it's in Sanskrit literature, it's you're not making love unless you leave bite marks and nail marks, and they're described poetically like crescent moons or something. Shivotpadhyaya goes into somewhat lurid detail about what joy you're supposed to remember. But this is not even while you're having sex. It's not even right now you're in the act. You're just recalling an act. You see how smara is being played with here? Smara is to remember, but it's also to have sex. So now you're remembering smarana, some smarana from the past. You're just remembering what it was like to have that experience. Even that will cause you to dive into bliss. Ananda samplava. Samplava means to dive, plunge into ananda. You plunge into bliss when you recall a sex act. You're in bliss when you're in the midst of a sex act. Arguably, this is this practice is a partnered practice, because it says so, Shakti Sangama. There are commentators who take this in a different, more apologetic direction. This might be a self-pleasuring practice. This is a partnered practice. And this, again, is a self-pleasuring, self-practice. You don't need a partner for 68 and 70. You just need a partner for 69, apparently. Sorry, the actual Sanskrit letters, numbers don't look like the English 69, so that joke doesn't really fly, but it's still funny. Now, this is interesting. We were all in this sex stuff, and it's oh my god, we're fetishizing that. But no, immediately upon talking about sex for 3 verses, we then pivot to something so wholesome and not to say sex isn't wholesome, but I think for most people reading this, to go from something transgressive and controversial and naughty to this is kind of interesting. Ānanda-mahati, ānande mahati praptye drishte va bandhava chirat. So when you attain the great joy, the ānanda-mahati of seeing a long-lost relative or bandha, a friend, when you see a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, or when you get joy in any other way, meditate on the arising and passing away of that joy. Anandam udgata, the arising of that joy. Dhyatva, one should meditate on that joy itself. Talayastanmana bhavet. Then through that, one's mind becomes pervaded with that joy. It's almost like a practice of, if you feel joy, focus on that joy and feel that joy expand, as it were. And anything can give you that joy. Like seeing a relative you haven't seen for a while, a friend. This is interesting. From the blossoming vijhimbhanat. It's a beautiful word. Jrimba, to expand. So vijimbrana, the special expanding of the rasananda, the poetic and the aesthetic bliss of jagti pana kritolasa, the ulasa, the arising of eating, the arising and blooming of bliss from eating and drinking. From this comes the state of fullness. Meditate on or contemplate on that, and then one will become the great bliss. Mahananda tato bhavet. Tata, and then one becomes the very bliss that you got from the food. Because after all, the bliss of the food is you. The bliss you get from the food is you. So when you eat the food and experience the bliss, it is your own bliss that you're tasting. Why not notice that, meditate on that, and feel that bliss to not just be in the food. It's everywhere. So there's a nice translation here from Joukowsky. I like it. The yogi should contemplate the state of spiritual plenitude he experiences, brought about by the unfolding of the joy, which is the savor, rasa, of the aesthetic delight, of the outpouring of consciousness, brought about by eating and drinking. So he describes vijimbranath not as an unfolding flavor upon the tongue, but as an outpouring of consciousness, which you experience anytime you eat or drink good food. And of course, gaping, yawning, blossoming, budding, blowing, opening, exhibiting, displaying, unfolding, expanding. All of these are from the root jrimba, like the word means all of these things, and all of the meanings are implied and invoked here. And this is, of course, everyone will love this. Gitari vishaya svadasama, song and music. Here's a translation. The yogi, through becoming one with the incomparable and unparalleled joy of relishing music, experiences an intensification of awareness, mano rudhesh, ruda, intensification of awareness, and through that absorption becomes one with that awareness. So any intense state of presence, which you can experience through music. Like music brings you into the moment, or anything like that. Gitadi means etc. So through experiencing song and music, in that intensification of awareness through artistic engagement, one will become that awareness. And finally, just a closing verse here in verse 74 before we enter a new section of the text. Yatra yatra manastushtir manastatraiva dharayet tatra tatra pra ānanda swarupam sampravartate. Wherever and whenever, almost like a Shakira song, the mind finds contentment, concentrate the mind there and there alone. There, the supreme bliss of the self is attained. The word yogi is used here very specifically. Yogi is one who is in sexual union, but it's also one who is an ascetic. So almost the argument here is like against asceticism. It's like, what are you running from? Yourself? And more importantly, why is bliss antithetical to the recognition of the self? Isn't it in the self that the bliss is being experienced? Of course, later in the Vijñāna-Bhairava, you'll have practices like running away from a battlefield, or focusing on the intense presence of pain, like during a piercing or maybe a tattoo. All of these are also valid, but so is bliss, so is pleasure. So the use of the word yogi is a subtle dig at those who consider yoga to be a state of asceticism. That's not yoga, that's viyoga, that's separating yourself. Yoga is union, and if you're in union with life, then you won't be afraid of bliss, because even in bliss, the beginning, middle, and end of bliss, whether it's desire or satiety, all of this occurs within awareness. So embrace bliss, embrace joy. After all, is that not our metaphysical idea to begin with, that this world is the joy of Lord Shiva? I'll go further. I'll say this. There's a category error insofar as we want to maintain that idea. Here, if I think I'll get joy from a practice that doesn't give me joy to begin with, how can I be free when my practice is not? How can I be joyful when I'm grumpy all the time while I'm practicing? How can I experience love when spirituality for me is just like judging people? Like, if the effect is something, it must be contained in the cause. And if sadhana is the cause for bliss, then the cause itself must contain that bliss. So why not be happy? Why not be cheerful? Why can't your sadhana be joyful? And if it's not, how do you expect any joy from that kind of sadhana? So enjoy your life. Arguably, if you don't know how to enjoy life and savor jokes and relatives and sex and food and music, you won't know how to savor. So there's implied here a deep metaphysic, but also a very practical method. Just cultivate your artistic sense. Sri Ramakrishna would say this all the time. Musicians, artists, painters, poets, they're very close to God because they've cultivated this sense, this artistic, aesthetic sense, rasa. They know what it is to taste and savor and be fully present with something. And I want to close with two references, one to the Dvanya Loka. So Dvani, it's the next section, and the last section, I promise. I'm almost done. The Dvani means, how to say, implied meaning, lakshyartha. The Dvani is that which makes a poem poetic. And notice this, it is more than just the structure of the poem. It's more than just the rhyme. It's more than just the word choice. According to the author of the Dvanya Loka, who is a very highly respected Rajanaka in the court of King Avantivarman, ānanda-Vartana, he says, a poem that just describes things is no poem at all. It's a poem, but it's like the worst kind of poem. And you've seen this, right? Like books that are needlessly aesthetically, they just describe a scene. Like, oh, there was a table, and that table, on top of that table, there was a cup, and then this protagonist comes and sits down and drinks from the cup. It's like, it's just descriptive. That's not very poetic unless there's a metaphor, unless the cup is a metaphor, and drinking from the cup is a metaphor, unless the table is a metaphor. If the whole poem is a metaphor, it's pointing to something beyond its literal meaning. That's called Dvani, and that's what makes a poem poetic. Its ability to be multivalent. For a thing to mean more than just one thing is called poetry. That Dvani, in the Dvani, discussions around Dvani, has been rejected. A lot of aesthetic theorists, aestheticians, you would say, a lot of philosophers of beauty and value and meaning and poetics have rejected the existence of Dvani. They argue that the poem is just in the structure. And you'll see these critics will talk more about rhyme scheme. They'll talk more about meter, right? And how certain words play off other words. Not even that, maybe. There's a way to engage with art where it's just so formal. It's so like dead almost. Like you're ignoring the rasa, the subjective quality, focusing instead on the objective qualities. Check this out, you guys. This is my claim. Materialism, hedonistic, consumer capitalist materialism is like reading the poem of the world, but never being interested in its deeper meaning. It's like hearing the word, but not inquiring as to the meaning, and never once thinking that the meaning is beyond the word, and yet contained within the word. So Dvani is very deep. Technically, it means the poetry of a poem. But metaphysically, spiritually, if you see the world as a poem, you can just be obsessed with its form. And insofar as you're only ever thinking about the form, you miss what makes that form beautiful. The self. do you see how Dhvani in poetics is applied by Abhinavagupta? He just comments on Dvanya Loka. His book is called Lochana, Dvanya Loka Lochana. But that aesthetic theory of Dhvani, you okay, Savannah? The thing fell over. Excited. The bliss and rapture of like, oh my god, the world is a poem, and I've been reading it wrong. So the whole time I'm reading the world, I'm only interested in rhyme schemes and form. I wasn't feeling it. Anytime I had an experience, I was only interested in the form of that experience, the story that I was telling about it. Was I feeling it? Was I really there with the rasa of that poem? So this is why I like for all this to be red and black. I know it's impossible to read, but this is rasa. Like there's something implied by the colors, red and black, that I'm trying to say without really saying. And notice all of these verses are in Dhvani. Dhvani in the sense that like there's so many meanings. They're multivalent. That's what makes us a poem. Not just its anushtup meter, ānanda-mīmāmsa prapte, drishteva bhandave chirat. Let's count them. ānanda-mīmāmsa prapte, 8. Drishteva bhandave chirat, 8. Wow, 16 beats per half line. Therefore, this is anushtup meter. Cool. I can talk about that. Who gives a fuck? Like, it's not about the form. It's not about the form, but the form supports something else. Some formless essence called rasa. It's not about the painting or the song. It's the way that painting and song feels in me. That's what I should be turning my attention to. And it's in Shanta Rasa that I tune into myself. I come in touch with my own self when I become quiet and present. That's called Shanta Rasa. And in that Shanta Rasa, whatever is experienced is subjective. So art from a more subjective point of view is necessarily going to be spiritual. For spirituality is about identifying as that subject. Consciousness, called Shiva, called the self, which is embodied as the world. How beautiful. Dvanya Loka, Lochana, Abhinavagupta commenting on Dhvani and how this world is Shakti, a sentence, and its meaning, or actually the world is a sentence whose meaning is me. Dhvani. Cool. I think I'm satisfied with that. And so how then do these affect the practices? Well, you'll see, like, we use beautiful things. Abhinava says, because when you use bells and smells, he says fragrant pastes and delectable foods and wine. He says all of these things induce bliss. And in bliss, the mind is more likely to be absorbed in itself. So bliss, joy, beauty, it subjectivizes you. It turns you to the raw experience. Herbie Hancock, I remember I was watching an interview with the jazz musician Herbie Hancock, and he says, people always ask me what I played. What scale was that? What chord progression did you use when you played that scale? That's what people ask him, he said. But he's like, I wish they would ask me what I was feeling when I played that scale. He's like, that's what I care about, like the feeling, the bhava, and the art is almost an afterthought. A poet is not a poet because she writes. A poet is a poet because she feels, and the writing is kind of like an afterthought of that feeling. Once I was in a mood, and I was sitting with this, I was in a cafe, and I met this tall, trans African-American woman in all red. She immediately started talking to me, and for hours she was teaching me hoodoo and voodoo, and she took me, like, it was great. She's from Louisiana, and like we were comparing notes on that tradition and this one, and she was sitting there, and of course I'm divinizing the whole thing, and I'm like, Ma, bless me that I may never write a poem down ever again. Bless me that I may only speak poetry in the spontaneous presence of things. Bless me, like I was asking for these things, right? And she said, why would you ask me to bless you with these things? You have them already. You're sitting with me, aren't you? Like, that really hit me. If I'm sitting with Ma alone does these things. Why am I asking Ma for these things? Ma alone, if I'm sitting with her, will do these things. And what are these things? Poetry, spontaneous, like, artistic expression. Each moment spontaneously is Ma expressing herself. And that will always be poetic because she's the poet of all poets. Mahakavi. Brahman in the Upanishads is described as like this supreme poet whose poem is the world. Don't focus on the world. Feel the poem. And that you can feel through the world. Hence the world has meaning. The world is valuable because it's a poem, but it only becomes valuable. Otherwise, it's just hedonism, and hedonism is just focusing on the form and not the... I don't think hedonists are actually happy. Hedonists pursue forms of pleasure. They don't actually get the pleasure from it. Haven't you noticed? They don't know how to savor and enjoy, even when they have that thing that they hedonistically are seeking. And that's why everyone's so bad at sex, arguably. They all want it, and when they get it, it's not pleasing for either party because it's the form and the concept that they were chasing, not the rasa. But if the rasa is your focus, then the whole, what is life but rasa? Rasa after rasa after rasa. And what is rasa but interiorizing yourself, subjectivity? Okay, cool. I think I'll leave the taittirīyopanishad ānanda-mīmāmsa alone because there's this like Vishāyananda and Bhajnānanda and Brahmananda. I'll just say Brahmananda is this Shanta rasa. I'm going to read it as the ability to stay centered in awareness while you experience everything within awareness, recognizing it to be none other than awareness. Now you can see that whether it's Vishāyananda or Bhajnānanda, the duality is no longer true. Whether it's a worldly joy or a spiritual joy, both are rasas, and both rasas appear within consciousness. Therefore, in that sense, if they're different, And Taittirīyopanishad tries to distinguish them. They're not different in kind or type or category. They're different in degree. And not even that, because there can be no degrees to consciousness. So chocolate cake and a good kirtan are equally blissful, because the bliss of both of those things have nothing to do with world or spirit. They have nothing to do with outside or inside, but everything to do with me, in which all dualities and dichotomies, like inside and outside, like world and God, like spirit and matter, ultimately get reconciled in the third thing, in the trika. So we call it the Kaula trika. So this is Abhinava Gupta's metaphysic, which leads to the, not Abhinava, but like the tradition's metaphysic that leads to a soteriology that makes partying a sadhana. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Oh fuck, the Bhakti thing. Never mind, next time. We'll do the bhaj, the participatory spirituality, congregational spirituality. It's enough to say partying is best done together. Om, peace, peace, peace. Jai Ma.